Morning, everyone. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Tuesday morning. Home Secretary will sign a new treaty with Rwanda today, which the government hopes will allow it to start deporting people. We'll speak to the Immigration Minister, that's Robert Jenrick, in just a few moments' time. Tuesday, the 5th of December.
James Cleverly will soon be touching down here in Kigali where he'll meet Rwanda's foreign minister and sign that agreement.
The deal with Rwanda is part of a major shake-up that will also clamp down on legal migrants, slashing the numbers, the government says, by 300,000 a year. Also ahead, the UN warns there is nowhere left to go after Israel issues fresh evacuation orders in Gaza. At least 9 people have been killed by a cyclone battering India's southern coast. Why the government is telling us all to stock up on candles and batteries. Check this out. Singer Rita Ora shows us some backbone at London's Fashion Awards.
They got cars big as bars, they got rivers of gold. But the wind goes right through you, it's no place for the old. When you first took my hand on a cold Christmas Eve, you promised me Broadway was waiting for me.
The story behind one of the nation's favourite Christmas songs, how it could have been Chrissie Hynde who sang the famous duet.
All the jokes they were singing, we kissed on the corner, then danced through the night.
Morning, everyone. Mari and Milena are here. Christmas song. Love that song.
Love that song.
Love
Kay.
that song.
Yes.
And we'll be telling you why it's in the headlines again. What else?
Morning, Kay. So today, Home Secretary James Cleverly is going to be landing in Rwanda for that treaty.
Actually.
Yeah, very, very soon, a matter of minutes. But the question is this policy anywhere near over the line? It's not.
And the government thinks that we're all too reliant on our digital infrastructure, on the internet, and that we're not really prepared in those things go down for either a major cyber attack or a natural disaster. So they want us all to buy more candles, torches and a battery-powered radio.
OK, see, I could do the gag about 4 candles. I tried that this morning. You're all too young to understand it. I'll see you both later. Thanks very much indeed. Home Secretary James Cleverly due to land in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, in the next few moments. Joining us is Yusra. You saw her in the openers for us there. Hi, Yusra. Tell us the plan.
Hi, Kay. I mean, we're expecting him any moment. His plane is currently over the DRC, neighbouring DRC. We're expecting him to land soon. His first call of business will be coming here at the Memorial for Genocide, the Genocide Memorial Museum here in Kigali. He'll come, he'll lay a wreath, do a tour of the premises, then he'll go for some private meetings, and then we're expecting the treaty to be signed later today and for there to be a press conference. Now, we have seen this plan stalled time and time again. It was announced in April 2022 and still not a single asylum seeker has been sent here to Kigali. We did speak to the Rwandan government, who told us that they will be re-emphasizing guarantees in the treaty that should offset any concern about asylum seekers being sent back to their home countries. When we did speak to UNHCR, they did say that the legal analysis they presented to the Supreme Court still stands. So we are expecting to find out more about measures that potentially could be put in place to really offset these concerns. But again, it would be quite surprising that the asylum system could be completely reformed in just a few weeks since the Supreme Court decision. So we'll wait and see what comes of the treaty.
OK, thanks. Due to land any moment now, Mari, they're really planning for the next election with things like immigration, aren't they?
Totally, Kay. Absolutely. It's, by all means, an absolute kind of general election campaign when it comes to the fact that they think immigration is a battleground that they can beat the Labour Party on. The difficulty, as we've seen over and over again, and as Yusra very rightly pointed out, is this is the third Home Secretary to visit Kigali, but we still haven't had a single asylum seeker actually be sent over there. And so time is ticking to be able to get this policy over the line. And as I was saying, this policy, yes, this is a moment where they feel that they could triumph, they can show things are working. They've signed this treaty. We're going to see the emergency legislation coming into Parliament potentially at the end of the week or maybe next week. But nonetheless, it's still a very long road ahead. Once that emergency legislation goes through, if it ever goes through, Will the Supreme...
Legislation, as we also call it. I mean, throwing in the
Exactly.
emergency line from the government makes it sound more immediate,
It adds
I
the
suppose,
drama,
yeah.
doesn't it, Kay? Exactly. It's really not smooth sailing for the government on this. It's still going to be quite difficult to get this over the line. Suella Braverman's been out tweeting, former Home Secretary, talking about how it's still not going far enough when it comes to curbing legal and illegal migration. So you could see this as a bit of a two-pronged approach. Yesterday with those curbs on legal migration, and then today with the treaty with Rwanda trying to focus on stopping the boat. So today we're going to see James Cleverly meeting his counterpart, Foreign Minister Dr. Vincent Biruta. He's going to be attending the Genocide Memorial. He'll be flying home still today as well, so it's a very brief trip. And then we're expecting the legislation to come into Parliament later this week. Now, he's also going to be visiting staff at the British High Commission while he's in Kigali. It is a fleeting trip nonetheless. We're going to be seeing images of him meeting his counterpart, but also of him at the memorial as well, hopefully. So there'll be kind of dotted images throughout, and then that all-important press conference, which will be a big moment where they can try and show that that partnership with Rwanda is still on the cards. There's been speculation that maybe Rwanda would start getting cold feet. So far, it looks like they are still on board.
OK, for now, thanks very much. Well, care workers will be prevented from bringing their families to the UK. We're going to be talking about that in more detail, aren't we, as soon as we see the Home Secretary land. So the very latest on that to come here on Sky News. Meantime, looking at some of the other headlines of the day for you now. And Prince Harry's legal challenge against the Home Office will go to court today. The Duke of Sussex is taking action over the decision that he would no longer be provided with the same level of police protection while in the UK. The hearing will last 2.5 days. Former US ambassador has been charged with spying for Cuba for more than 40 years. Manuel Rocha, who served as US ambassador to Bolivia in the early 2000s, was arrested at his Miami home on Friday. Number of people confirmed dead following the eruption of Indonesia's Mount Merapi has now reached 23. A second eruption spewed hot ash as high as 800 metres and delayed search operations. US police are investigating an explosion at a house in Virginia where officers were trying to serve a search warrant. None of the officers was seriously injured, but it is unclear what happened to the suspect. And an American tourist has died after being attacked by a shark while visiting the Bahamas. The woman was paddleboarding with a partner in New Providence. A lifeguard rescued the pair, but the woman, who police say was in her 40s, couldn't be saved. Now, the UN has warned of panic in Gaza after Israel issued more evacuation orders telling people to move. The number of displaced people has doubled to around 1.9 million, almost the entire population. Let's get more on that, should we now? And Alistair is standing by in Jerusalem for us. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has this report for us.
It doesn't matter where you are now in Gaza, the fighting is getting closer and closer. People are sheltering in this hospital courtyard in the north of Gaza. Outside, the battle rages. Smoke rising from an airstrike nearby. Further south, they're intense again in the hospital complex. But in reality, it's not safe here either. 3-year-old Khalid was in one of those tents when a missile hit nearby. This is the intensive care unit. He's being treated on the floor. His distraught grandmother by his side. Khalid was hit by a single piece of shrapnel as he slept.
We were sleeping in the tent when we found the boy bleeding, and when we took him inside the hospital, we saw that a missile had hit behind the hospital. And as you can see, he's injured and he's in ICU. They say it's safe here.
In another hospital, or at a different time, Khalid may have lived, but he did not. He couldn't be saved here. Family took him away, another child lost. The Israeli Defense Forces have confirmed their operations in the north are nearing completion, and the focus now is on the south. Their latest pictures show soldiers taking positions deeper and deeper into Gaza. The instruction to the population is to move further south immediately.
We are giving precise instructions to Gazan residents near Hamas centers of gravity, urging them to temporarily move away from the danger that Hamas puts them in.
But it's not easy. This is the road south. A woman with children and local journalists are attacked. They run for safety. Bullets whistle by. Why they were targeted is unclear, but they were heading south. Israel's right to defend itself is undoubted, but it's the cost to human life that's the issue. And the numbers of civilian dead is equally, undoubtedly rising. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News.
As promised, Alistair with us now live from Jerusalem this morning. Hello to you, Alistair. The UN once again flagging their concerns overnight.
Yeah, there is a lot of concern internationally, not just amongst aid organisations, as you'd expect, but also primarily from the Americans about the ferocity of Israeli operations continuing into the south of Gaza. We're now 60 days into this war, and the Israeli fighting in Gaza is starting to spread to all areas of the strips. There are some reports from senior commanders in the north of Gaza that they are close to completing their operations there and securing and having total control over the north of Gaza. But as we've been reporting over recent days, as Stuart was saying in his report there, they are now focusing on, in particular, Khan Yunis, a city just into the south of the Gaza Strip, a city which they believe has a vast network of tunnels underneath it and possibly is where senior Hamas leadership are hiding. But so many civilians now, more than 2 million, crammed into half of the Gaza Strip, meaning that the humanitarian situation is getting critical indeed. But the Israelis have said they're going to push on into the south with every bit of much ferocity as they did in the north. That is not probably what the Americans will want to hear.
No. Alistair Finay, thank you. Meantime, a powerful storm is battering India's southern and eastern coastlines. Schools have been closed, thousands have been moved to safety, and at least 9 people have died. Let's get more with Neville, who's joining us live from Delhi. Hi, Neville, good morning. Tell us more.
Morning, Kay. Yes, as we speak, this is in the cyclone Migjam is in the process of making landfall on the southern state of Andhra Pradesh, on the coastal regions, close to a place called Bapatla, where it will make landfall, and with winds of about 90 to 100 kilometers and gustings of 110 kilometers, and the tidal wave going up to 1 to 1.5 meters. Now, there have been a number of precautionary measures brought in by the government. 181 relief camps have been set up where thousands of people have been taken to for safety. Vulnerable areas, low-lying areas, all these places people have been moved out from. We've also seen this cyclone hug the coast of Tamil Nadu, particularly the city of Chennai, which was battered with very heavy rains, and we've seen a number of low-lying areas being inundated. There have been reports of death out there, but mainly out of electrocution and felling of trees. India has learned a lot of lessons over the last few years and decades of natural disasters, particularly cyclones, and they've brought into place a lot of mechanisms, especially after the 1999 super cyclone, which hit the coast of Orissa, killing over 15,000 people. And since then, a number of precautionary measures have been put in place. This cyclone will then move inland and will dissipate and weaken because of the terrain. This is according to the meteorological department officers, but we will wait to see the kind of destruction or devastation it will bring along with it.
OK, for now, thank you. Thanks a lot. Now, the only thing I need in the morning is a cup of tea, as Buster knows, our floor manager, maybe 2 or 3. But, Elena, good morning.
Wow.
We might need other stuff as well.
Good morning, Kay. Well, if you find yourself in a natural disaster or amid a cyber attack, these kind of things you might find useful. We've got some batteries here, got some candles, more like tea lights, but in a disaster,
Still
you
works,
can't
yeah.
be picky.
Yeah.
And then you've got a torch in here. These are all items. Oh, is it working?
It is working.
There we go.
Yeah.
These are all items that the government would like you to have in your home.
I've got my phone.
No, well,
That's got a torch on it.
Well, what happens if your phone goes down?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a major
That's a good
cyber
point.
attack.
Yeah.
You can't charge your phone. There's no access to the internet, so you can't get any information. That's when you need these batteries to put into your radio, so you can then get information from the officials in a case of a massive national emergency. So this is all coming from Oliver Dowden, Deputy Prime Minister, but also the Minister who's in charge of planning for national disasters, planning for resilience in case of a national emergency. He's saying that we're all too resilient on digital infrastructure, on our phones, on the internet, and that we should all get prepped in case those things are suddenly unavailable because of...
What do they know that we don't?
Well, they don't think anything is imminent, but there are some credible threats to the UK. There was a list of 89 threats published earlier this year. They include the grid going down, a major cyber attack, or the use of malicious drones to target transport, all sorts of kind of scary things. But
You've cheered everybody up Tuesday morning.
But don't panic, don't panic. You've got your torch. The lights go down and you don't have any lights, you've got your torch, you're ready. Some tea lights there.
And batteries.
And batteries, and that's kind of what you need to...
Any
to
specific
get
batteries?
So I think AA batteries.
AA batteries, yeah.
How much? I know. Well, there will be a government resilience website which will give you more information about this next year. Although it is slightly ironic, it will be a website. So
I see. Yeah. So you need to
write it down.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
keep it somewhere.
Exactly. It's good to see you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Let's look at the front pages for you this morning. And one story dominating them all, the Times reporting on the government's 5-point plan to cut migration, with claims from the Home Secretary that the plan can halve net arrivals. Metro also leads on latest plans to curb UK migration with the headline, Rishi raises the bar. See what they did there? The Financial Times reports that wage and visa rules for overseas workers will be toughened up as part of the process. And finally, let's have a look at the Express. The plan will slash migration numbers, they say, by 300,000 per year. Let's see what Robert Jenrick thinks about all of that. Minister of State for Immigration. It's good to see you. Is this a good
morning,
day?
Kay. I think it is. We stood on an election manifesto in 2019 to use the levers that we were going to have for the first time after leaving the European Union to control net migration. That's what the public want. That's what the public have been voting for at pretty much every general election for 30 years. And now, today, we are truly using those levers. We're pulling them to ensure that we bring down the levels of net migration. This is the biggest ever intervention by any government to reduce the numbers of people coming to our country. And why is that important beyond meeting our manifesto commitment and the trust that the public place in us?
It's 229,000, the manifesto commitment.
This matters to us because we want to build a more productive economy where businesses aren't just reaching for the easy lever of foreign labour. We want to help people off welfare and into work. And we want to reduce pressure on housing and public services, and also to build a more socially cohesive and united country, which is difficult, I would argue impossible, when such large numbers of people are coming into the country. And so the package of measures we've announced this week will make a very big difference, a profound impact, at least 300,000 fewer people coming to the country each year.
Yeah, but you will fall short of your manifesto commitment.
Well, I'm committed to the manifesto commitment.
Are you going to reach it?
I think we can. I think what we are setting out here is a path to do that. This will lead to at least a 300,000 reduction. In addition to this, there are other factors at play, such as...
That's still more than 150,000.
Well, there are other factors at play as well, because you're seeing the large numbers of Ukrainians and Hong Kongers and Afghans who've come to the country in recent years. Those numbers are starting to flow through the system, leading to a further reduction. And I'd say this, Kay, this matters a great deal to me and to the government. And so if we need to do more, we will, because we're committed to reducing net migration. And so if there are further steps we have to take in the months ahead, then we will do.
Why not?
But people should be in no doubt that this is a very big first step.
Why not?
Well, we have been preparing this package for some time. We've seen...
Nothing to do with you going on to an election footing?
Not at all. I mean, I've been speaking...
You hesitated then, Minister.
No, I've been speaking about this, as you know, including on your programme, for as long as I've been in this role. All of us in government care about meeting this manifesto commitment. The key reform was leaving the European Union. That gave us the power to do this. We then did have a period of great flux with the pandemic and its immediate aftermath, when the economy and public services like the NHS were under immense pressure. But now is the right moment for us to really grip this challenge and to bring into play some very, very substantial, I would argue, the most fundamental reforms to our immigration system.
Looking at these
for many
massive
years.
numbers, I mean, is it the boats? We hear a lot about the boats, but surely you are it's about 40,000 less than that at the moment. That's just a smokescreen over here compared to these massive numbers that we're talking about. Why bother sending the Home Secretary to make a big deal in Rwanda today?
Well, they're two different but interconnected challenges. The first one we've been talking about is legal migration. Those are people coming to our country perfectly legally, and we want to ensure that the rules are the right ones so that we have an immigration system that the public can have confidence in. The second one is about illegal migration. I think it's profoundly wrong for people to be entering our country illegally on small boats. Well, according to the law, Kay, the law says you can't enter the country illegally. If you or I crossed an international border or literally broke into another country, we would expect to be treated very seriously.
They broke into another country, are you? The people who come on small boats?
I am, yeah.
That's the phraseology you're happy to use, Minister.
I am. If somebody comes into our country on a small boat,
are breaking into our country.
Yes, they're coming into our country in flagrant breach of our immigration rules. That is wrong. I think it's doing untold damage to our country. That's why we're determined to stop it. We have made a lot of progress over the course of this year. The numbers coming on a small boat have reduced by around a third.
So why do we need to send them to Rwanda?
Because we want to go further. The public don't expect us just to reduce the numbers by a third, although that is amongst the best records of any European country. They want us to stop this in its entirety.
But you haven't managed to do that.
Well,
yeah,
that's why. But that is why we want to do. That's why we want to get this plan up and running.
Are you confident that planes will take off to Rwanda before the next election?
I am, but we will need to do a few things to achieve that. The treaty that the Home Secretary is going to sign later today, I hope, will create a fundamentally different and better arrangement with the government of Rwanda that answers the concerns of the Supreme Court. And then we're going to bring forward a piece of emergency legislation which will embed that in British UK law and go further to close some of the loopholes that bring spurious claims and prevent migrants from being put on those planes. Together, I think that will enable us to get this plan up and running. And this is a plan that is absolutely critical to getting levels down, to really securing our borders, and one which is now being looked at by a range of other European countries who share our determination to tackle this issue and understand that mass migration is one of the big challenges of the 21st century. You have to grip it. There's no way you can just duck this or hope it doesn't exist.
Let's just go into a few of those 5 points, if we may. We don't have a lot of time. Britain's married to a non-native partner won't be able to bring them to the UK unless the UK citizen earns £38,700. So if you're married to somebody but they don't earn that sort of money, but you're a British citizen, you can't bring your partner in.
Well, these are rules that haven't been updated for 10 years, and so we're updating them. Not quite, Kay, no, because you can apply earnings and savings. But the principle behind this is a long-standing one, which is that we think that if you want to bring a dependent to come and live in the UK, you should be able to support them financially and not knowingly be a drain on the taxpayer. Of course, there's always a safety net. That's the country we live in. But you should have an expectation that you can support that person in their new life in the UK.
We can't go through each of the 5 points because we don't have time, but let me just use this as an illustration, if I might. 95% of visas granted for chefs and managers last year, they would not be able to come in if this 38,700 figure was in place.
Well, we want to ensure that British companies are training and investing in British workers. That is fundamentally important to our country. There are millions of people who are on welfare or economically inactive. You heard Mel Stride just the other day at the autumn statement.
You want to get off your bottom and go and do these jobs?
I'm saying there's a moral question here that we want to help people off welfare and into work rather than reaching for the easy lever of foreign labour. And we also want companies to be investing in their workforce, paying them higher wages. We're just raising the national living wage, investing in apprenticeships and skills, things this government has been promoting since we first came to power in 2010. an economy which is solely based on bringing foreign labour into the UK is not a sustainable path to prosperity.
Voters need to be careful what they wish for, because they're going to have to go and do these jobs.
Well, people do whichever job they want to do, Kay. We're not telling people to do particular jobs. What we're saying is we would rather a British company was training and investing in their own workforce rather than reaching to bring foreign labour into the UK. And we certainly don't think that it's healthy for the economy to be undercutting the wages of British workers by paying them 20% less than their British counterparts, which is what the rules currently allow. We're changing that so that if you do bring workers over, they have to be paid the same.
That particular aspect. I think Labour in March step with you on that one. We're almost out of time. The UN's warned of an even more hellish scenario in southern Gaza. Your thoughts?
Well, all our thoughts are with people living in Gaza. We want this conflict to come to an end as soon as possible. The best way to achieve that is for Hamas to release the remaining hostages, which they're continuing to hold, and for Israel to succeed in eradicating terrorism there. That is the foundation stone for peace in Gaza, in Israel, in the West Bank, and would be a good thing for the whole world.
Do you share the UN's concerns about what's happening in Gaza at the moment?
Of course. We want to see more humanitarian aid, supplies and medicines get into Gaza. We have put millions of pounds at the disposal of the United Nations and other organisations. We're working diplomatically. David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, was in Israel only the other day, urging more humanitarian access. And he's very... Of course, we all feel that any loss of life is a tragedy. But what I would say is that the root of this problem is Hamas. And so Israel has to be allowed to eradicate Hamas. And only by doing that can we secure peace and a sustainable future for people in Gaza and in Israel.
OK. When's the next election going to be?
You need to get the Prime Minister on the show.
OK, anytime. I'm sure he's watching you. Morning, Prime Minister. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Turning unsettled, a bit milder, but there'll still be some wintry conditions over the next couple of days. Northern and western parts are fine, but frosty, bar a few coastal showers. England and Wales, milder but largely overcast and windy, with outbreaks of rain. That will fade through the morning, with sunny spells developing in the north and the west. But eastern parts will see showers moving in.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
All eyes on the red carpet last night for this year's British Fashion Awards, and among the sequins and glitter was this rather daring look. Your eyes aren't playing tricks with you. Those are spikes you can see on Rita Ora's back. And ahead of the award, she posted a video on Instagram revealing it would take around 2 or 3 hours to apply them. It's going to ruin her coat. Inspired by Joan of Arc, Alexa Chung rocked up in a dress covered in metal discs, which apparently took 2 weeks to put together. You could probably hear her before you saw her, I'm sure of that. Can you imagine trying to sit down in that? And it was slightly less showy affair for Stormzy, who kept things simple in this outfit, perhaps a little laid back compared to some of his fellow celebs. Still sharp, though, wasn't he? Now, with the Home Secretary visiting Rwanda today, what are the legal ramifications for the government pushing on with its asylum plan? Plus, football's coming home. The Premier League secures its largest ever UK television rights deal. With whom? And gaming fans get their first look at the hugely anticipated Grand Theft Auto 6.
United Kingdom. These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want them.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Again, everybody, very welcome to join us. Breakfast show, Sky News Tuesday morning. Marius here. We're still flabbergasted.
Yeah.
About him saying...
Robert Jenrick saying illegal migrants coming over on small boats have broke into our country.
He really said that?
He really did say that. It was striking rhetoric, the kind of rhetoric you would expect to hear from potentially Suella Braverman. Now that she's not there anymore, perhaps it's time for, or Robert Jenrick feels it's time for him to step up and be the more robust figure in the Home Office. We know that James Cleverly, for instance, has said the Rwanda policy is actually not the be-all and end-all. He doesn't think it's the most important policy. Robert Jenrick, very, very strong on that policy.
This is what he said.
I think it's profoundly wrong for people to be entering our country illegally on small boats. Well, according to the law, okay, the law says you can't enter the country illegally. If you or I crossed an international border or literally broke into another country, we would expect to be treated very seriously.
They broke into another country, are you? The people who come on small boats?
I am, yeah.
That's the phraseology you're happy to use, Mr.
I am. If somebody comes into our country on a small boat,
are breaking into our country.
Yes, they're coming into our country in flagrant breach of our immigration rules. That is wrong. I think it's doing untold damage to our country. That's why we're determined to stop it. We have made a lot of progress over the course of this year. The numbers coming on a small boat have reduced by around a third.
So why do we need to send them to Rwanda?
Because we want to go further. The public don't expect us just to reduce their numbers by a third, although that is amongst the best records of any European country. They want us to stop this in its entirety.
Absolutely fascinating with that interview, Robert Jenrick. I was shocked when he said that, but also...
Doubled down on it as well.
Exactly, he didn't back away from it, he didn't shy away from it. He said, absolutely, that is what I believe. I believe they are breaking into our country. And I think what's also interesting is, I think it'll be interesting to see how the Labour Party react to this in terms of, do they agree with the kind of, almost kind of criminalising rhetoric of what some would argue are desperate people, asylum seekers fleeing persecution and war. Now, the government saying not everybody is fleeing that, and that is why. And yeah, absolutely, and it is always going to be a mixture, isn't it? But nonetheless, I think the Labour Party, I'd be surprised if they try and mimic that kind of rhetoric. I'm assuming, we'll see, whether they say that they would say the same thing. What was also really interesting was he said he was confident that there would be planes to Rwanda before the next general election. Now, most cabinet ministers on this sofa that you've been asking that question to, they've said they wouldn't guarantee it, they wouldn't put a date on it. They hope that would be their dream, all these kind of wishy-washy words, but no concrete promises. Robert Jenrick, from the Home Office, saying he is confident there will be planes to Rwanda. That was fascinating, because he is one of the only members of the cabinet who's willing to put his neck on the line and say that. And thirdly, what was interesting was he also was talking about, yes, he's committed to the 2019 manifesto pledge to get net migration below 250,000 before the next general election. That is a massive ask, and not really, from what it looks like the measures that were announced yesterday, something that looks easily possible. Yeah. He says he's confident. Yeah. How they're going to do that, we have no idea.
He had 3 Weetabix this morning, hadn't he?
He really had. And finally, what was really interesting as well was he said, if we need to go further, we will. Very much a kind of a hint, a tease, that this could just be the first step. The measures yesterday, the Rwanda policy, maybe the government are going to go even harder if they don't think it's enough. Absolutely fascinating interview, Kay, this morning.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating too. Let's wait and see what Downing Street might say about that during the course of the day. Of course, the Home Secretary has also arrived in Rwanda within the last few moments. James cleverly signing a new treaty in Rwanda later on today. We'll get more on that. For now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Meantime, we'll also be bringing in UNICEF in just a few moments' time. They're going to be talking to us about the latest situation in Gaza. This is the scene in Gaza, looking across from the Israel border, the United Nations speaking overnight, saying they are increasingly concerned about the humanitarian challenge in the region. We'll have more on that as well, as I said, with UNICEF coming up a little bit later on. Before that, though, Joshua's here, our legal commentator, and he's going to talk to us in more detail about Rwanda. Now, the Home Secretary has gone. He's just landed, we believe, in the last few moments. Suggestions that, lots of suggestions, one of them being that lawyers here in the UK could be based in Rwanda. Could that ever happen?
That's rather unusual, isn't it? Because the job of a lawyer is to advise. And I don't know that Rwanda has said we need British lawyers here because we haven't got lawyers of our own to run our own courts. I suppose the thinking is that they would supervise how these arrangements are going through and perhaps even come back to the UK and give evidence to the courts if there's a further challenge.
OK. The Rwandans not very happy about it, is what we're being told at this stage.
I would have thought they might even think it's... I hesitate to use the word colonialist, but...
It's a word that's been used.
It's a word that's been used. If they're there to help, well, help is very nice. If they're there to tell Rwanda what to do, I could see that Rwanda might resent it.
Indeed. What's the difference, in your expert view, between Rwanda Treaty and the Rwanda policy?
The policy, as dealt with last year, was to sign an informal memorandum of understanding, an informal agreement. This is a formal treaty. Why didn't the government do a formal treaty last year? Well, because it's more difficult. You need to lay it before Parliament for 21 days. It can be debated in the House of Commons. It can be challenged in some way. On the other hand, it's more binding, and it's the sort of thing that might persuade a court next time round that the government's serious.
Emergency legislation is what it's been described as. I never tire of saying it's legislation. You can throw in emergency if you want. It amounts to the same thing. Are they basically saying that a country that the Supreme Court has said is not safe is safe just by changing the legislation?
I'm sure that's what they'd like to do, and I'm sure that won't convince the courts. Now, what the Supreme Court said last month is that the structural changes and capacity building needed to eliminate the risk of asylum seekers being sent back where they came from, to eliminate that risk may be delivered in future. And the thinking is that this policy will deliver that, and Parliament will say this is solved and so on. But as you say, legislation, emergency legislation, it's not really emergency legislation. It's not going to be introduced till next year, as far as I can see it. Maybe we may see a bill this week, but the government doesn't seem to have decided exactly what it's going to say. That legislation will obviously be binding on the courts, but the courts will have to interpret it.
OK. While I have you, talk to me about Prince Harry. He wants... Go on, tell me.
No, his case is back in court today. I'm not saying he's necessarily turning up in person.
No.
He's not required to give evidence. This is a challenge to James Cleverly, who has delegated powers to decide what level of protection people like Prince Harry should have to a committee called RAVEC. RAVEC decided to withdraw the protection he had at the level he had when he was a working royal, when he ceased to be a working royal, and he is challenging that decision by the government delegated to this committee, RAVEC, and he is hoping to get it overturned and restore the level of protection he used to have.
So what level, I mean, what legal grounds does he have for that?
He's saying that the Home Secretary acted unreasonably and so on. Now, we don't know the details because, obviously, details of personal protection for VIPs and members of the royal family are not made public, and so some of this hearing, most of this hearing, as far as I can see, will be in private. But nevertheless, he's arguing that the Home Secretary acted unreasonably and RAVEC acted unreasonably in taking this decision.
What sort of precedent does it set if he wins?
Well, he would obviously hope he would then get the level restored, but it's very, very unusual. I mean, you don't often get the King's son going to the King's courts and arguing that the courts should overturn a decision by the King's government.
When will we know?
Not for some time, certainly not till next year. It's a 3-day hearing and the judge will undoubtedly reserve a decision, which means we won't get it until the new year.
OK, Joshua, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let's take you to Kigali, as promised. Now, we believe that the Home Secretary has just arrived. Yusra is there for us. Slightly delayed flight, but he's got a packed day ahead, hasn't he?
He does, and he is 2 hours behind, so everything's kind of been pushed into the afternoon. But for now, we are where he's expected to arrive first, the Genocide Memorial Museum here in Kigali. This is his first overseas trip as Home Secretary. He is following in the footsteps of Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, who've all come here in the past to try and get this deal sealed. But this trip is being seen as the final step to getting this deal through. This treaty is expected to implement measures that will really offset concerns that the Supreme Court, the UK Supreme Court, has around the safety of asylum seekers. We'll see what those measures are and if they're adequate enough to allay those concerns. But there is also the issue of costs. How much more will be paid to the Rwandan government to make this deal pass? We've already seen £120 million last year go up to £140 million. But there is a lot less transparency around what the costs are. Last time we were here, we did see a hostel that had been standing empty for a year and a half, waiting for those asylum seekers to come from the UK. So there are a lot of questions, and hopefully some of them will be answered today.
OK, for now, thank you. Thanks. Obviously monitoring the movements of the Home Secretary throughout the course of the day. About 6 o'clock last night, we learned that football is staying home for the next 4 years. Rob?
A new deal for Sky Sports, keeping the Premier League on Sky until at least 2029, having been there right at the start in 1992, kick off a whole new ball game.
Hey.
Yeah, of course, the news came first.
Now, my little boy was thrilled that the standout thing for him was that football is going to be on Sky on Boxing Day.
Yes, as part of this new deal, at least 100 more games on Sky, about 215 in total, because we say at least under this new deal, every game that isn't at 3 o'clock on a Saturday will be live on television. 52 of them on TNT, which was BT, but the rest of them will be on Sky Sports, including every game on Boxing Day. Also, every game on the final day of the season will be on Sky Sports as well. And as we saw on Sunday at 2 o'clock, there were 4 games taking place, but only one of them could be viewed here. Yet they could be watched around the world, but that will change under the new deal.
How much did you have to raise your piggy bank for this?
Well, it's going to cost £6.7 billion over the 4-year deal. So it's about £1.7 billion a season that the Premier League are going to be generating, an increase of 4%. That's for all the deals in total.
But per match, it's cheaper.
It will be because there are more games on. If you think back to 1992, then it was about 60 million a season. So it's costing the broadcasters a lot more. The clubs are getting a lot more, so a lot more for them to spend on players. And it gives the clubs more financial certainty now going all the way through to 2029 if they're trying to buy players, sell the club. Of course, there'll be questions over subscriptions and also questions over how much will be redistributed right the way down the lower leagues as well, with talk still ongoing between the Premier League and the EFL about that.
Oh, I want to ask you another couple of questions, if I may. I know we're tight on time, but why is the Premier League worth so much more than, say, even, I don't know, Serie A?
And it has built up to become the most lucrative league in the world, seen as the most competitive, and part of the sort of growth throughout the 1990s, attracting players here. Not always the biggest names in the world, but certainly that competitive balance that you don't see perhaps in Germany, where Bayern Munich win the title every year. In Spain, it's between Real Madrid and Barcelona, effectively. And yes, we have Manchester City dominating the last few years, but still...
No, steady on. I'm not sure that they dominated. Where's Arsenal this season? Thank you very much.
Still up there.
Yeah, thank you. Why not 3 o'clock on a Saturday?
Well, it's still protected by the FA for those lower league attendances, because even down into the 5th division, we can get thousands to go into matches. But just yesterday, the government backing calls to open up that 3 o'clock window for WSL matches. So perhaps in the future there could be women's games in that 3 o'clock slot, because it can be hard for them to get a distinctive slot. And given those 5 decades when women's football was banned, perhaps it would be seen as a way to boost the growth of the women's game by giving them that slot.
And Andrew, my producer, saying if you want to watch real football, you can see Celtic on Sky.
It is Scottish Premiership on Sky Sports as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. It makes him happy, so that makes me happy. It's good to see you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Now, to what might just be the greatest Christmas song of all time?
Oh, are we going for Fairy Tale of New York?
We are. You're reading my script. Fairy Tale of New York by the Pogues. Here we go.
They got cars big as bars, they got rivers of gold. Put the windows right through you, it's no place for the old. When you first took my hand on a cold Christmas Eve, you promised me Broadway was waiting for me.
Iconic voice of Kirsty MacColl singing alongside Shane MacGowan. But the song's producer, Steve Lillywhite, has told the Mirror newspaper that the band originally wanted Chrissie Hynde to feature instead, before eventually agreeing to let his then-wife, Kirsty MacColl, try out the vocals. How different the song might have sounded instead of this. Oh, what a great song. Still to come, a warning from the White House that the US is running out of money to support Ukraine. We'll speak to Estonia's foreign minister next about what that means for the war in Eastern Europe.
The online safety bill was already coming about, but there was nothing to cover the image-based sexual abuse law or any change to it anyway, until my case became so big and so widely spoken about. And basically at the time, there was a clause within the law which said the only way to convict someone was to prove that they intended to cause you distress, you know. So it's really hard to prove that someone intended to harm you when they uploaded that footage. And, you know, you shouldn't have to prove what their intention was. If you're going to film someone in a sexual act or you're going to share sexually explicit content without consent, that is just wrong, full stop. And it doesn't matter what your intentions are. So I was really shocked by that, and I knew it was meaning a lot of victims, 1, didn't come forward, or 2, didn't have a successful conviction when they did. So, yeah, I started speaking to local MPs and seeing what was the best way to evoke change, and they said, you know, the online safety bill is going ahead in about 6 to 9 months. I think there's still a chance to make an amendment, and luckily, it was just the perfect timing to get that added to the online safety bill and make it an official law.
So just to remind people who perhaps aren't aware of your case, the man involved here was a man called Stephen Bear. He was sentenced to 21 months behind bars, also ordered to sign the sex offenders register and given a restraining order not to contact you for 5 years. Now, for many people, their journey there would come to an end. You've got justice, you want to get on with your life. But such was the public nature of your court case, because you were both in the public eye through being on television, that people started to come forward to you to talk about their experiences.
What made me have to make a difference and sort of continue on with campaigning around image-based sexual abuse is just the sheer overwhelming amount of people reaching out to me. Like, I just suddenly became this person that anyone going through it, I was their first port of call. And there were so many messages, like, honestly, just an overwhelming amount. And like, most of them felt let down by the justice system. Most of them didn't know what to do. A lot of them never wanted to tell anyone else about the incident. But it was like people were crying out for help, and I'm having to read this every single day. And it's like I couldn't sleep at night without knowing I was taking some form of action to help these women, especially when I can relate so much to feeling so lost, but I think most importantly, unheard.
Pleased to be able to say that Markus Sakner, close enough,
Yeah,
Estonian Foreign Minister, is here with us this morning. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Why are you here?
I came for the visit to meet as well the Foreign Secretary Cameron. I know him already years, but now he is in a new position, and we have very good relations with Great Britain. We have British troops actually in Estonia protecting NATO. So I was defense minister when I welcomed these troops, and we have very good cooperation. But of course, how to support Ukraine? What is the next initiative? Because Great Britain has been one of the frontrunner of breaking so-called red lines about new initiatives, about tanks or the fighters or long-range missiles. So we need to find a new initiative to take it back.
What are your main concerns?
Main concerns, of course, how much we can support Ukraine militarily, ammunition, weapons, and of course we decide and discussed as well about our production capabilities in Europe as a whole. We have money, we have political will, but not production. So we have to gather somehow the private sector as well.
Some reports suggesting out of Washington that the US can't afford to continue to offer armoury to Ukraine. I'm guessing you're going to say they can't afford not to.
We actually can. We must make decisions. But of course, US will have elections, and all this internal debate will touch as well this Ukraine topic. But I'm sure that US will decide this package of Ukraine. But the question is whether we have a long-term commitment. And one topic I'm dealing in Estonia as well is how to put Russia pay during the war. So we have framed the legal framework, and it's now in the parliament about legislation that we can use actually the Russian frozen assets even during the war. So we must explain as well to our taxpayers that not only they must pay and support Ukraine, but also we can use Russian frozen assets. This is like a new solution and first time in Europe as well. And we discussed this as well yesterday with the Foreign Secretary, and he will have a meeting as well probably in DC. So this is something common we can discuss publicly and also use the Russian frozen assets.
Do you think you would get more support from a President Trump?
I don't know. I've been a defense minister when President Trump was in office, and we had a very solid cooperation, but you never know. But it's not my business here to discuss what will happen, because US is a democratic country, and I think that US will always remain to support Europe as a military power, as a member of NATO, but also Ukraine as well. But of course, we are very interested about the results, what will come.
How much trouble is President Zelensky in politically? There's an election in 3 months' time.
President Zelensky, they won't have like the elections, but of course the political intention will raise.
There should be one in March of 2024. There's still some debate as to whether or not that might go ahead.
Yeah, but it was already decided, and it is a very lawful and right decision not to run elections during the war. And it is, they cannot follow
there are rumblings to change that, as you know.
Yeah, but the case is that how can you have elections when you have soldiers in the front? You have war ongoingly. You cannot actually have campaigns based on the democratic values. So it is impossible. And if you have like millions and millions of people left their homes and also left the country. So the results, actually, if we are following the EU standards or democratic standards, they won't be there. So I really do hope that during the war, Ukraine will have and has now the very strong leadership. And after the elections, after the war, there will be elections.
But you feel that he has the support of the Ukrainian people at the moment?
Because I think so. Of course, there is a political...
That's not what I'm hearing.
Yeah, there are a lot, of course. After 2 years being at war, there are lots of political intentions, but I don't see that it harms the leadership.
Talk to me about what's happening with the Israel-Hamas war if you would, please. It's horrible to make these comparisons, but there isn't as much focus on what's happening in Kiev and Ukraine at the moment because of what is happening in the Middle East. What sort of challenges does that create for your region?
That's a challenge, actually. We need to walk and chew the gum at the same time as a Western world. But I'm sure that there's no change in the meaning of giving the military support or financial support because of Gaza. I think that we can do both. But of course, the attention is going away from Ukraine and even from the news. We are not talking so much about Ukraine successes as well. We are much more criticizing that maybe Ukraine is not developing so well as we expect. But actually, we have great successes as well. The Black Sea, the Russian Navy has pushed away from that. More than 200 years.
Yeah, but the regaining of territory in Ukraine is not what the Ukrainians and the wider region had hoped.
Yeah, we all hope. But the case is that 2 years ago, when Russia invaded, then it had to be like 6 days a special operation. Now we have already close to 2 years the full-scale war. So it is some achievement, of course. But expectations are higher than actually the reality. So we must believe in to Ukraine and their people, and we must continue support. But of course, Russia enjoys, in the meaning, destruction of the attention. Of course, everything what is happening now in Gaza, it is something very, very awful, and all our attention is there as well. But we have to share it somehow, and we can do it, I hope.
We're almost out of time, Minister, but just before I let you go, do you think that Ukraine can win this war? And if so, for how much longer will the Ukrainian people be fighting?
I think this winter will be crucial and it will be very important. I believe that Ukraine can win the war. We can push Russia back to Russia, but it depends on us as well, because Ukrainians are doing everything. I was a defense minister 2016-17, and I saw the other side of the Baltic border, like more than 100,000 troops ready to go to us. These troops are not existing anymore. They were sent to Ukraine, and literally they're done. So they are fighting in Ukraine, not for us, but instead of us.
Minister, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for visiting our country. You're always very welcome, and hopefully you have a fruitful day with His Majesty's opposition. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. All today's stories in just a moment here on Sky. Stay tuned. Morning, everybody. 8 o'clock, the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, tells this programme this morning that people who came to the UK on small boats broke into the country. And that as a result of the treaty his boss is expected to sign today in Rwanda. He's confident the first deportation flights will happen before the next election. We'll get Labour's view in just a moment. It's Tuesday, the 5th of December.
James Cleverly has arrived here in Kigali, where he'll be meeting the Rwandan foreign minister and signing that agreement.
Well, the deal with Rwanda is part of a major shake-up that the government will slash migration numbers by 300,000 a year, they say.
If you or I crossed an international border or literally broke into another country, we would expect to be treated very seriously.
Broke into another country, are you the people who come on small?
I am, yeah.
That's the phraseology you have to use. Also ahead, the UN warns there is nowhere left to go after Israel issues fresh evacuation orders in Gaza. At least 9 people have been killed by a cyclone battering India's southern coast. While the government is telling us all to stock up on candles and batteries, singer Rita Ora shows some backbone at London's Fashion Awards. Plus,
They got cars big as bars, they got rivers of gold, but the windows right through you, it's no place for the old.
the story behind one of the nation's favourite Christmas songs, how it could have been Chrissie Hynde who sang the famous duet. Well, let's get more with Murray and Milena. I cannot believe what the Minister said this morning, Murray.
Kay, I was speechless. Robert Jenrick, Home Office Minister, has said that illegal boat crossings, people coming over the Channel, are breaking into our country. Let's watch the fallout from that.
Well, let's indeed. We've got Yvette Cooper coming on in just a second. Batteries, candles and torches.
Indeed, all the things that you need in case of a major cyber attack or a natural disaster. If the internet goes down or there's a power grid outage, the government thinks we're not prepared. We should stock up on those.
OK, and you can find out about it on the website.
Yeah.
Not sure how that works.
Flight floor.
Yeah, OK. We'll see you later, ladies. Thanks very much indeed. In the last hour, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has touched down in Rwandan capital Kigali. What's going on? Yusra is standing by for us. He was a little bit late, wasn't he, Yusra?
He was late. He was 2 hours late, but he's expected to arrive here at the Memorial Museum, the Genocide Memorial Museum, soon. That will be his first visit to pay his respects and then move on to the business of the day. The treaty being signed is obviously the big event of the day. Now, even though the deal was announced in April 2022, it was just a memorandum of understanding between the two governments. Now we're seeing it formalized, and this came after the UK Supreme Court ruling that deemed the plan was unlawful and unsafe for asylum seekers. So what we're expecting this treaty to lay out are measures that have been agreed between the two governments that will offset concerns, the Rwandan government says, around asylum seeker safety. Now, with these measures will come costs. That's what's to be expected. This is called a Migrant Economic Development Partnership here in Rwanda. There is an economic element for the Rwandan government, but there has been very little transparency around new costs that might be incurred by this treaty. We did see the deal jump from £120 million last year to £140 million this year, as the accommodation that is expected to house the asylum seekers stands empty and has been booked out for a year and a half. We are expecting other costs, but whether or not that will be shared is another question. Now, the UNHCR, the UN refugee body, does stand by its legal analysis that it submitted to the UK Supreme Court that Rwanda is not safe for asylum seekers. So whether the treaty will change a climate of asylum seeking that they have been involved in as a refugee body for decades is yet to be seen.
OK, for now, thanks. Monitoring what the Home Secretary is doing throughout the day. Meantime, one of his ministers, oh, goodness me, causing all sorts of mischief this morning.
Absolutely. Morning, Kay. So Robert Jenrick, Home Office Minister, was on this sofa moments ago telling you that illegal migrants who come on small boats across the Channel are breaking into our country. Really, really
Use that
spicy.
phraseology.
He did use that though almost to the word. Now, he talked about how essentially, you know, it's not fair, it's not legal. But what was really interesting as well was he said that he was still committed to the 2019 manifesto pledge to get net migration under 250,000. He also said he was absolutely confident that he would see flights to Rwanda with asylum seekers on board taking off before the next general election. We still don't know when that's going to be. You did ask him, he wouldn't give you anything on that. Fascinating in terms of, we had the measures announced yesterday, and we've got Home Secretary today in Kigali signing that treaty, trying to show not just his party but the public that they are taking migration seriously. But some backbenchers on the right of the party have told me there's a lot of frustration that these measures that were introduced yesterday were not introduced earlier in terms of making sure that they get the benefit before a general election. I think there's a frustration that it's slightly too little, too late. And can this really impact an election?
Great question. For now, thanks very much indeed. This is what Robert Jenrick had to say.
I think it's profoundly wrong for people to be entering our country illegally on small boats. Well, according to the law, okay, the law says you can't enter the country illegally. If you or I crossed an international border or literally broke into another country, we would expect to be treated very seriously.
They broke into another country, are you, the people who come on small boats?
I am, yeah.
That's the phraseology you're happy to use, Miss?
I am. If somebody comes into our country on a small boat,
are breaking into our country.
Yes, they're coming into our country in flagrant breach of our immigration rules. That is wrong. I think it's doing untold damage to our country. That's why we're determined to stop it. We have made a lot of progress over the course of this year. The numbers coming on a small boat have reduced by around a third.
So why do we need to send them to Rwanda?
Because we want to go further. The public don't expect us just to reduce the numbers by a third, although that is amongst the best records of any European country. They want us to stop this in its entirety.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper's here breaking into our country if they come on small boats.
Well, we want to stop dangerous boat crossings. They are undermining border security and putting lives at risk. What that means is we've got to have action to go after the criminal gangs who are making huge sums as a result of these dangerous boat crossings. And instead what we've got is it's a bit like Groundhog Day. You've got the third Home Secretary in less than 2 years off to Rwanda with another chequebook. They've already spent £140 million, more spent this year. They won't tell us how much, more promised again next year. They've got more Home Secretaries going to Rwanda than they have asylum seekers for this failing scheme that's still only going to tackle a few hundred people when more than 1,000 people have come over the last week because they're still not going after the criminal gangs.
Are you happy with the language that he used?
Well, look, I think you've got to be very clear. We've got to tackle the dangerous boat crossings, deal with the criminal gangs and make sure that we've got... I think what people want to see is strong border security and also a fair and effective asylum system that doesn't have huge backlogs, doesn't have huge chaos in it. At the moment, the Conservatives are failing on both counts. They're not tackling border security and they don't have a fair and effective asylum system. And time and again, all they do is they go for the rhetoric, they go for the headlines. They don't actually have practical plans to tackle the problems.
To be clear, Shadow Home Secretary, would you use that language?
You've heard me answer the questions and use very different language because I think we should be...
Would you say that they are breaking into our country?
I do think that we should be stopping those boat crossings. It's not what we want to see. But I think the important thing is not about what language or rhetoric we use. The issue is about what practical policies that we have to tackle it. So we've set out policies which are about going after the criminal gangs, a new cross-border unit that could actually take the action that we need, working with other European countries, including stopping the supply chains, stopping the boats making it to northern France in the first place. The government's completely failing to do that cooperation work. And instead, we've got, the Home Secretary arriving in Rwanda again today and just going round the same circles all over again. Okay. They've been doing this for 18 months and using huge amounts of taxpayers' money. And that is on top of course, all of the money that they're spending in costly asylum hotels. We would also end the asylum hotels as well.
OK, I'm surprised that a Labour Shadow Home Secretary would not condemn that sort of language from people who are, some of them, not all of them, some of them fleeing for their lives.
That's right. And there's also, look, the UK has always got to do its bit to help those who have fled persecution and conflict. That's why we have to have a fair and effective asylum system. But we do also need to make sure that we prevent dangerous boat crossings that undermine border security and put lives at risk.
Do you think planes will ever take off for Rwanda?
Do you know, I mean, they have been
announcing these headlines, announcing these policies for 18 months now. We've had 3 different bits. This will be the 3rd amount of new legislation that they promise is going to solve it all. The first piece of legislation that they passed, they've ended up having to partially revoke because it wasn't working, was making things worse. The second new law that they did on channel crossings, they haven't implemented because they know it won't work. We've got a 3rd one promised. We've got, more money, more cheques being written to Rwanda. And at the heart is this failing scheme that even if they do manage to get it to work, it is only a small number of people.
Do you think it will work?
I think it's failing. And
will it work?
I think...
Do you think before the next election we will see people taking off from London Heathrow and landing in Kigali?
I don't know what other contortions that they will come up with. But what is clear is even if they do manage to get some flights to Rwanda, actually, this is still only ever going to affect a very small number of people. The court said maybe about 100 people, and yet you've got 56,000 people who are in asylum hotels at the moment because the Conservatives are completely failing to clear the backlog. We've set out a Labour plan that would clear the backlog, end hotel use, and would also save the taxpayer billions of pounds rather than end up continually costing the taxpayer more, which is what this Rwanda plan seems to be doing.
That's going to be a vote winner, though, if those planes take off.
Well, if it's just a policy that's simply a gimmick and actually doesn't work to tackle the problems,
Sure that this government's tough on migration.
Well, is it? I think what it's going to show is that they're continually chasing headlines rather than actually tackling the problems, which is that you've got the dangerous boat crossings. They're not going after the criminal gangs. Criminal gangs are now making hundreds of millions of pounds from this illegal trade, from what is effectively profiting from putting lives at risk. And they're not doing anything to tackle that. You've seen a drop of about a third in the convictions of smuggler gangs, of criminal people smugglers, since the last Labour government.
Talk to me about these 5 measures outlined by the government to reduce migration, legal migration. Do you support them?
Well, we do think that net migration needs to come down. There's been a record increase in net migration since the last election. Yeah, and that is a result of Conservative policy failures on the economy as well as on immigration and asylum. So the measures we call for was to get rid of this unfair 20% wage discount for overseas recruitment. It was unfair. It was introduced by the Conservatives less than 4 years ago. Rishi Sunak was involved in introducing that policy. They have finally agreed to get rid of it. We clearly support that. We have also called for an increase in salary thresholds because that, I think, the Migration Advisory Committee has said that there is an issue about low-paid migration being exploited. We think they should advise on the details, but none of this will work.
That number, though, 38,700.
We think they should advise on the details, but we do think it should increase. But none of this will work without action to tackle the skills shortages and to properly link training requirements to the immigration system. And there's nothing on that. There was nothing on that yesterday. Nothing to tackle the huge recruitment problems in social care. Nothing to tackle the huge recruitment problems for engineers. Engineering apprenticeships have halved over the last few years. So no wonder the number of engineering visas has gone up because they're failing to tackle those skills shortages. So what Labour would do is set up new requirements. So where firms are recruiting from overseas for shortage occupations, then there should be new training requirements in the UK as well.
Do you agree with Robert Jenrick, representing the government this morning, that Brits need to get off their bottoms and do some more work?
Well, I think there are people working really hard right across the country right now who are facing a cost of living crisis, who are really struggling to make ends meet. And I think the Conservative government hasn't a clue about the fresh pressures families are facing and how hard that people are working.
But Brits need to do more.
Of course, British people should be working, and that's why people are working right across the country. Now, there is a problem about the big increase in people who are long-term sick, and a lot of that is because you've got these huge, long waiting lists in the National Health Service because people are waiting for treatment that they urgently need and can't work as a result. Well, I would like to see the government doing something about tackling those huge long waiting lists in the NHS and also working to help people get back into work. People, for example, we saw a big increase in over 50s not working after COVID, helping people get back into work. And that's the right thing to do. But, you know, unless you tackle those NHS shortages, you're not going to tackle the problem. And don't use this to have rhetoric about undermining hard-working people across the country who are really struggling right now.
Like your leader, do you admire Margaret Thatcher?
I'm the granddaughter of a miner and I represent a coalfield community. So I think, look, Margaret Thatcher did huge damage to coalfield communities, so I don't support her policies.
How would you describe her?
I think she did huge damage to our coalfields. She, I think, just didn't understand our industrial communities across the country, and we're still seeing some of the scars in our coalfields today.
OK, and what have you said to Keir Starmer? Have you pulled him to one side and said, mate, come on?
No, look, the point he's making is about the importance of having a vision for the country, and that is what he set out. He set out 5 missions for the country that... Well, no, actually, that's not what he said. What he said was the importance of having prime ministers who set out, who have the vision and the things that they want to change in the country, and that is the kind of prime minister that I think Keir Starmer would be if he was elected, if Labour is elected at the next election, with a clear sense of things that he wants to change in the country to get the economy growing again, to get more police back on our streets and halve serious violence. Those are the practical things people want to see to change lives.
I think I'm right in saying Lee Anderson was a miner, though, aren't I?
That might be right, I think. Yeah, we have quite a lot of disagreements there.
Yeah. I'm not pushing you on that one. It's good to see you as always. Thanks very much indeed, Yvette Cooper. Thank you. Looking at today's front pages for you now. One story dominating the Times reporting on the government's 5-point plan to cut migration, with claims from the Home Secretary that the plan can halve net arrivals. We'll see. The Metro also leading on latest plans to curb UK migration, with the headline, Rishi raises the Bard. See what they did there. The Financial Times reports that wage and visa rules for overseas workers will be toughened up as part of the process. According to the Express, the plan will slash migration numbers by 300,000 per year. Daily Mail leads on the same figures in what it calls the biggest ever clampdown on migration. Looking at other headlines for you on the programme this morning, a former US ambassador has been charged with spying for Cuba for more than 40 years. Manuel Rocha, who served as US ambassador to Bolivia in the early 2000s, was arrested at his Miami home on Friday. Powerful storm is battering India's southern and eastern coastlines. Schools have been closed, thousands have been moved to safety, and at least 9 people have died. Number of people confirmed dead following the eruption of Indonesia's Mount Merapi has now reached 23. A second eruption spewed hot ash as high as 800 metres and delayed search operations. Now, the UN has warned of panic in Gaza after Israel issued more evacuation orders, telling people to move immediately. The number of displaced people has doubled to around 1.9 million. That's more than 3/4 of the entire population. We'll get the latest from Alistair, standing by in Jerusalem, in just a moment. But first, here's Stuart's report.
It doesn't matter where you are now in Gaza, the fighting is getting closer and closer. People are sheltering in this hospital courtyard in the north of Gaza. Outside, the battle rages. Smoke rising from an airstrike nearby. Further south, they're in tents again in the hospital complex. But in reality, it's not safe here either. 3-year-old Khalid was in one of those tents when a missile hit nearby. This is the intensive care unit. He's being treated on the floor. His distraught grandmother by his side. Khalid was hit by a single piece of shrapnel as he slept.
We were sleeping in the tent when we found the boy bleeding, and when we took him inside the hospital, we saw that a missile had hit behind the hospital. And as you can see, he's injured and he's in ICU. They say it's safe here.
In another hospital, Or at a different time, Khalid may have lived, but he did not. He couldn't be saved here. Family took him away, another child lost. The Israeli Defense Forces have confirmed their operations in the north are nearing completion, and the focus now is on the south. Their latest pictures show soldiers taking positions deeper and deeper into Gaza. The instruction to the population is to move further south immediately.
We are giving precise instructions to Gazan residents near Hamas centers of gravity, urging them to temporarily move away from the danger that Hamas puts them in.
But it's not easy. This is the road south. A woman with children and local journalists are attacked. They run for safety. Bullets whistle by. Why they were targeted is unclear, but they were heading south. Israel's right to defend itself is undoubted, but it's the cost to human life that's the issue. And the numbers of civilian dead is equally, undoubtedly rising. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Southern Israel.
Alistair standing by for us in Jerusalem, hearing from the United Nations, who are once again, they say, concerned about the collateral damage being caused. Terrible phrase.
Yeah, there is a lot of civilian casualties being reported as a result of Israel's continued operations in Gaza. As Stuart said in his report, they think they have come close to completing operations in the north of the Gaza Strip, although I'm sure there'll be sporadic fighting there for a long time to come. But the focus for the military now turns to the south, and with it the hugely complex and concerning issue of how they fight in the south and try and achieve their objectives whilst at the same time sparing civilian life. There's been some discrepancy over the numbers who've been killed in Gaza. Of course, the Israelis say that you cannot trust the health ministry in Gaza because of its links to Hamas. But there have been reports over here from two unnamed Israeli military officers speaking to journalists, saying that they believe that the 15,000 figure, so 15,000 dead in total, of which 5,000 estimated Hamas fighters, are pretty accurate. And so that goes to show the scale of civilian casualties in Gaza and why not just aid organisations like the United Nations, like the Red Cross, but also the White House are so deeply worried about what has happened, but what could happen in the coming weeks as Israel pushes on with its fight.
OK. For now, thank you. Hearing from one of the aid agencies in the next hour here on Sky News. Meantime, let me tell you about the last decade officially being the hottest on record. The World Meteorological Organization said winter sea ice in the Antarctic was at its lowest level on record, and wildfires were burning across a record area of Canada. They pointed to a deafening cacophony of broken climate records and predicted that next year would be even worse. Oh, well, that didn't cheer you up. What about this? Big concerns from the government about power cuts?
Well, they're concerned that we're too reliant on digital infrastructure, the internet, power, in case there's a cyber attack or a major natural disaster that wipes all of that out. What will most people do? So they would like people to stock up on some of these things. Got a torch here.
Oh, I thought you were going to do a Blair Witch thing for a second then.
Really decided not to. Got some AA batteries, got some candles, things that Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, but also the Minister in charge of planning for disasters, preparing the country for disasters, he would like us all to have this. So your lights go out, you've got some candles, your phone's not working, you can't charge it, so you put some AA batteries into your radio. Now, how many of these do you have in your house, Kay?
All of them.
All of them. Well done. You're very well prepared.
I was a child of the miners' strikes in the 70s, so this is not new to me.
Right, so I've got probably half a scented candle somewhere. I don't think that's going to save me in a disaster. But the minister says that we should prepare to be thrown into an analog sort of age in case of some of these disasters happening. It's all quite theoretical at the moment, although the government has published a list of what it calls 89 threats that the UK could be facing, ranging between, AI, someone getting a power of, someone with a malign idea getting power of AI tools, then cyber attacks, power outages, so on. So they would like us to get prepped for the worst case scenario, have this in the house, and then we can all sort of face it.
It's Christmas present sorted. It's nice to see you, Milena. Thanks very much indeed. Some excellent football news for you now. The Premier League is staying home. It's signed a new record deal for matches to be broadcast on UK screens. So let's get the details. Should we? Rob is here. It's cause for celebration.
Well, for viewers who've been a bit frustrated that you couldn't watch as many games as they'd want on television, so now on Sky there'll be at least, 215 games a season, up by around 100. The other live games, 52 will be on TNT.
OK, so tell me more about when we might be able to see them, which sort of games they are, how much does it cost, how long does it last for? All these questions and more.
The questions everyone's asking. It's even easier than ever before. Any game that isn't at 3 o'clock on a Saturday will now be live on British screens. Around the world, you can watch all 380 games a season live, but still the 3 o'clock window is protected.
Why?
So fans go to those lower league matches, and you can get thousands even going down into the National League.
Even down to Tottenham. Sorry, kidding.
Yeah. And if you look at
Not really.
if you look at what happened on Sunday, there were 4 games at 2 o'clock, but only one of them was on television. So you get fans, subscribers who are actually wanting access to those games, and that will be possible now under this new deal. And also, fans will only need 2 subscriptions, TNT and Sky, because Amazon are no longer going to be a rights holder in this new 5-year package until 2029.
So Boxing Day games on Sky?
All 10 games will be live on Sky on Boxing Day, as for the first time, all 10 games on the final day of the season as well on Sky.
Cool. How are they going to do that?
A lot of
split screens going on. How much is it?
Well, this is the perfect place to watch all 10.
We can negotiate. Sky Sports, we can negotiate. How much is it going to cost?
Well, it's going to cost £6.7 billion overall for the 4-year deal with TNT and Sky. It's up 4%. It's come a huge way since the first deal in 1992 when all games were on Sky, and it worked out about £38 million a season. Now Sky have the maximum number of packages they can get, 4 out of 5. There'll be questions, obviously, what impact there'll be on subscriptions, but there hasn't been the sort of huge rise as we saw a few years ago when rights went up 70%. And the Premier League are going to get even more probably from around the world, because such is the appeal of the Premier League that certainly in the current deals we're in, the Premier League makes more money from international broadcasters than here in the UK.
So the deal is record-breaking, but the cost per game is cheaper?
It is, because there are more games going to be available on air, and perhaps that's the way the Premier League has managed to secure this increase, by making more of the games available. So it ensures there is an increase in the cash coming in. And from the lower league clubs, they'll be asking for some of that to be redistributed more down into the pyramid. And there are still talks between the EFL and the Premier League, slightly fraught over what they're calling the New Deal.
OK, and this is a deal that lasts 4 years?
Until 2029, so season and a half left on the current deal, then the new one all the way through to 2029. So certainty all round, particularly as the clubs start to plan those transfers. They know exactly what the situation is going to be with the TV revenue.
Yep, football's staying home. Thanks very much, Rob. Thank you. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Turning unsettled and a bit milder, but there'll still be some wintry conditions over the next couple of days. Northern and western parts are fine, but frosty, bar a few coastal showers. England and Wales are milder, but largely overcast and wintry and windy, with outbreaks of rain as well. That will fade through the morning, with sunny spells developing in the north and the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Check this out. All eyes on the red carpet last night for this year's British Fashion Awards, and among the sequins and glitter was this rather daring look. Here we go. Spikes on Rita Ora's back. And ahead of the awards, she posted a video on Instagram revealing it would take around 2 or 3 hours to apply them. What about taking them off? How long is that going to take? Maybe she slept in them. Inspired by Joan of Arc, Alexa Chung rocked up in a dress covered in metal discs, which apparently took 2 weeks to put together. You could probably hear her before you saw her. Not sure she could sit down. And slightly less showy affair for Stormzy. He was keeping it sharp. Looked great. Still to come, we're going to be hearing how one of London's last remaining gentlemen's clubs could soon be welcoming women. And we'll be speaking to the former chief of the General Staff, General Lord Richard Dannett, about the latest in the Middle East.
United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, don't want them.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. With us now, former Chief of the General Staff, General Lord Richard Dannett. So much to talk to you about. Thank you for joining us, as always, my Lord. Let's start with Gaza. We're hearing from the UN overnight, who are increasingly concerned about the humanitarian crisis that is Gaza. And yet, the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, is moving south and saying that they will continue to do that. You thought that the land offensive was a good idea?
Well, given that the Israelis have actually said that their strategic objective is the destruction of Hamas, they've got to see that through. At least they've got to see it through while world opinion allows them to do it, and particularly while American opinion allows them to do it. But of course, the other side of the coin is that Hamas's avowed strategic intent is the eradication of Israel. So you've got a real clash of strategic objectives here, heightened by the ghastly goings-on the 7th of October. And then, of course, the very large number of Gazan civilians who have been killed in the intervening time. So there are a huge number of pressures going on. Technically, the Israelis have got a very difficult military operation to carry out. Above the ground, on the ground and below the ground. And now the fact they've moved into southern Gaza, they've expanded their own problems, if you like. But you have to ask the question, where are the Gazan civilians going to go? A lot have moved from northern Gaza to southern Gaza. They've told them safe areas to go to, but I bet those areas aren't very safe.
I think a question that's probably vexed you in times past is how do you destroy an ideology, though?
That is the big issue. I mean, of course, we go back and we always draw these analogies to after 9/11, when the United States declared a war on jihadism. Well, how do you destroy an ideology? And history shows you that the more pressure that you put on something somewhere, it'll squeeze out somewhere else. So it is a really big issue. I mean, I think from the Israelis' point of view, they've really got to think how they want to try and live in future. Now, everyone talks about the ideal solution or not the ideal solution. Maybe the only solution is a two-state solution. That's such a bumper sticker. It's such sort of easily said. But what does it really mean? What it really means is that somehow over a period of time, the Israelis have got to find an accommodation with the Palestinian people in Gaza and in the West Bank, whereby they can live together. And although it's absolutely tragic what's going on in Gaza at the present moment, I think it's almost as bad what's going on the West Bank, with the settlers putting a lot of pressure on legitimate Palestinian occupants of the West Bank. What does that say to the overall Palestinian opinion? What does it say to countries in the region that are intrinsically pro-Palestinian? It just heaps the problems that the Israelis are going to have to solve.
And what about the challenges that is created with a vacuum when you are clearing an area of land? I was going to call it a country. Perhaps I shouldn't call it that at this stage, but a region. You literally are flattening it as you go. It creates a vacuum.
It certainly creates a vacuum, and actually it creates a wasteland as well. So again, this is something that the wider community has got to be thinking about. Think beyond the immediate conflict. Who is going to make Gaza livable in? Who is going to spend a lot of money from other countries to give the Palestinian people the infrastructure and the opportunity to live in the future? I mean, it's a nightmare in the short term, but the medium to long-term difficulties are absolutely huge. And it's not just something for Israel and the Palestinian authorities, it's for all the countries in the region and wider countries to be really worrying about how they are going to solve this in the future.
And let's turn to Ukraine, challenges there.
Well, the major challenge in Ukraine is that the much-discussed Ukrainian counter-offensive, which we talked about a lot during the summer and the autumn, has effectively run out of steam. And I think the point that we have to reflect on is, while Western countries were agonising last spring and early summer about how many tanks, how many bits of self-propelled artillery, how much ammunition they were going to give to the Ukrainians, the Russians weren't wasting their time. They were building these really comprehensive and deep defensive lines that the Ukrainians, now that when they began their offensive, found really, really difficult to crack. There's a little bit of progress being made in the centre. There's a little bit of progress being made around Kherson, crossing the Dnieper River. But those don't provide a springboard for the decisive offensive that was being talked about. So one has to come to the growing realisation that there may have to be some form of negotiation. And I think one also has to put it in the wider context.
Zelensky, he said under no circumstances ever.
No, well, and I think from his point of view, I completely understand that. And it has to be his decision whether to go down that track. But he has to think beyond, does he want to condemn his country to perpetual war? And then he has to think, well, if it is going to be something approaching perpetual war, is the opinion, Western opinion in particular, that's been supporting him, is that going to hold up? Or is his support gradually going to erode? When it reaches the position whereby Russia has become stronger, Ukraine is becoming progressively weaker, and the terms of the conflict may turn against Ukraine. It may be, and it must be his decision, not ours, it may be that there is a realisation at some point that he would be better to offer some form of negotiation. And there is a sort of subplot in that. If he was to offer some form of negotiation and the Russians turn it down, that says an awful lot about the Russians and less about the Ukrainians.
OK, maybe not him. Maybe someone will replace him?
Well, there are divisions in Ukraine. We've already seen a spat between Zelensky and his military chief of staff. And there are other tensions around corruption and around political manoeuvring. For now, we and the Americans and others absolutely must stand foursquare, shoulder to shoulder, all the cries with Ukraine. But I think everybody has to realise that there is a time element to this, and eventually, over time, it's going to favour the Russians and not the Ukrainians.
OK. We must leave it there, my lord. As always, it's a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Kay.
Thank you. Just want to take you to Kigali, arriving somewhat late, but nevertheless a full day ahead for him. The Home Secretary, James Cleverly, there he is at the Rwandan Genocide Memorial Museum in Kigali with the President. It's a very moving moment to walk around the Genocide Museum. Genocide in the early 1990s. He will be, as far as the government is concerned, hoping to sign a new treaty with Rwanda to eventually, they say, get the people who have arrived in the UK on boats illegally into the air from Heathrow and arriving in Kigali. We'll monitor his progress throughout the course of the day. Meantime, new guidelines are being set out for transgender prisons and prisoners in Scotland. What's going on? Let's find out. Connor standing by for us. Morning, Connor.
Morning, Kay. Yeah, this centres on the case of Adam Graham, the double rapist who, while awaiting trial here in Scotland earlier on this year, transitioned to become known as Isla Bryson, and following Scottish Prison Service policy at the time, was sent to an all-female prison. You can imagine how that went down. There was an almighty political row, a double rapist being placed in the same prison as vulnerable women who were also serving time. That then triggered a standoff between politicians and has led to this review in policy that has been outlined today. Let me just take you through a couple of points. It is saying that trans people with a history of violence against women will not be sent to male prisons like the one I'm at here in Glasgow, Barlinnie, unless there are exceptional circumstances. So it's not ruling it out altogether. They're saying that they can be placed in a women's jail if they are deemed not to present a risk that is unacceptable risk of harm. So just to contrast that with England and Wales, in England and Wales, all trans women who have not undergone surgery are banned from prison. So that puts Scotland on a different path to England and Wales. The Scottish Conservatives here, who have been campaigning relentlessly over the course of the last number of months, have said that Isla Bryson is a beast who gamed the system to try and get access to women, and they're saying this new policy is subjective and unacceptable. Clearly that's something that's been rejected by Scottish ministers this morning.
OK, Connor, for now, thanks so much indeed. Thank you. Let's talk about football. It's staying home. Premier League has agreed a record new deal with British broadcasters. Let's get more, should we? David Davies, former exec director of the FA, broadcaster, of course, and consultant as well. It's good to see you, David. Thanks for joining us. What did you think of the deal?
Well, as a football fan, Kay, I'm absolutely delighted. And let's not beat around the bush. This is a great tribute to what Sky and their coverage have achieved over the past 30 years. And, you know, we wait to see the impact on subscriptions. That will be important. The worry I have, the only worry I have, or certainly the biggest worry I've got, is that the gap between rich and poor in football is almost certainly going to get wider. And that's why some of us came round to the view, with reluctance, of the need for an independent regulator, which now both sides of the House of Commons support and was in the King's speech.
OK, so from what you're saying, that potentially will be something that will be resolved in the fullness of time. In the meantime, why is the Premier League so popular?
Why it's so popular, I say to everybody, particularly friends of mine who don't like football, I say go to watch a Premier League game. If you're lucky enough to travel abroad, go and sit in a Hong Kong bar late at night over there and see Man City, say this, the game on Sunday between Man City and Spurs, which was terrific excitement. And the top teams do lose to the bottom teams, and different teams do win the Premier League Championship. If you go abroad, Germany is the best example. Bayern Munich win virtually every year, do they not? And in Spain, you can say probably 3 teams fight it out, and basically 2.
Which I can't remember. Are you a Man U fan? I can't remember.
Yes, I kept it hidden pretty well, but I used to have lots of ructions with Man U, but I am a Man U season ticket holder.
Yeah,
but I have
so
many
sorry.
friends. I defend myself, even at Arsenal. I have many very good friends who are gooners like you.
Yeah. What is it, though? You say, late night in a bar in Hong Kong watching a game. But you would imagine that would be similar with Serie A or whatever, but it just isn't. There's just some magic that is the Premier League.
The grounds are full, and that's very important. And it's very interesting. And I spent years and years, Kay, arguing with people about the relationship between football and television, and what it should be and what it shouldn't be, and the effect of having live matches on the screen on other attendances. Well, actually, that argument seems to me now to be redundant. And I hope very much that we will get to a situation, as I say, it's very important that the independent regulator that's coming addresses financial issues as well as other issues. Because if they don't, this gap will just only get wider, and that's what we do not want to happen.
Final thought, the 3 p.m. kickoff on a Saturday still sacrosanct. Is that how it should always be?
It's sacrosanct, but like so many things in broadcasting, my view is it probably will not exist in a decade's time. But it is also, as your excellent sports correspondent Rob said half an hour ago, it's a great opportunity for women's soccer to fill that gap and play at that time, at a set time when everybody knows when it is.
David, I can't believe you said soccer. You were doing so well, and then you said soccer right at the final hurdle. It's good to see you.
Too many American influences, maybe, now and again.
Absolutely. It's good to see you as always. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, how one of London's last remaining gentlemen's clubs could soon be welcoming women.
The online safety bill was already coming about, but there was nothing to cover the image-based sexual abuse law or any change to it anyway, until my case became so big and so widely spoken about. And basically at the time, there was a clause within the law which said the only way to convict someone was to prove that they intended to cause you distress, So it's really hard to prove that someone intended to harm you when they uploaded that footage. And, you shouldn't have to prove what their intention was. If you're going to film someone in a sexual act or you're going to share sexually explicit content without consent, that is just wrong, full stop. And it doesn't matter what your intentions are. So I was really shocked by that, and I knew it was meaning a lot of victims, 1, didn't come forward, or 2, didn't have a successful conviction when they did. So, yeah, I started speaking to local MPs and seeing what was the best way to evoke change, and they said, the online safety bill is going ahead in about 6 to 9 months. I think there's still a chance to make an amendment, and luckily, it was just the perfect timing to get that added to the online safety bill and make it an official law.
So just to remind people who perhaps aren't aware of your case, the man involved here was a man called Stephen Bear. He was sentenced to 21 months behind bars, also ordered to sign the sex offenders register and given a restraining order not to contact you for 5 years. Now, for many people, their journey there would come to an end. You've got justice, you want to get on with your life. But such was the public nature of your court case, because you were both in the public eye through being on television, that people started to come forward to you to talk about their experiences.
What made me have to make a difference and sort of continue on with campaigning around image-based sexual abuse is just the sheer overwhelming amount of people reaching out to me. Like, I just suddenly became this person that anyone going through it, I was their first port of call, and there were so many messages, like honestly, just an overwhelming amount, and like most of them felt let down by the justice system. Most of them didn't know what to do. A lot of them never wanted to tell anyone else about the incident, but it was like people were crying out for help, and I'm having to read this every single day, and it's like I couldn't sleep at night without knowing I was taking some form of action to help these women, especially when I can relate so much to feeling so lost, but I think most importantly, unheard.
Talk about a gentleman's club called the Garrick Club. It's often in the headlines. Charles Dickens, Laurence Olivier, Stephen Fry, yada, yada. No women in that list. Daphne Romney KC, barrister at Cloisters Chambers, is with us. Men's clubs, this day and age.
Men's clubs. There are three different sorts of attack you can put on it. The first is under the Equality Act. You're allowed to have single protected characteristic associations. As a business, goods and services, you're not allowed to discriminate. So I couldn't run a restaurant and say, I don't want any women in it. I couldn't run a coffee shop or a bar and say, I don't want any disabled people in it. But I can do that if I am an association. Now, there is an argument, and there was nearly an argument brought by Emily Bendell, but it didn't proceed, but she raised the argument. What are they doing? They're providing goods and services. They're providing goods and services, but to their members, but also to guests. So I could go in as a guest. I couldn't pay for anything, but I would be consuming their food and drinking their drink. So that's one legal argument. The next argument is an internal argument about their own rules, because they took opinion ages ago which said your rules are okay, you can exclude women because it says he must be nominated. And so he must mean men only. And also there's something about gentlemanly pursuits or gentlemanly accomplishments or something in the rules. Now, the barrister who wrote that opinion 11 years ago, Michael Beloff, who was actually my pupil master, my first pupil. I know, made me feel very old. Michael's changed his mind about that. And he's now said, well, under the Law of Property Act, this sounds really arcane, under the Law of Property Act, he means she and she means he, and therefore he must be read as meaning men and women. So there's now an internal argument that actually, under their own rules, regardless of what the Act says, they can't keep people out. And then the third...
We're talking about this, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. The third argument is the moral argument. Should there be men and women's separate associations? If you want them, then it's got to work for both sides. If you don't want them, then it's got to work for both sides. But also, there was a petition, you may know, that was a couple of years ago, which I signed, which I think 100 QCs then signed, and a lot of solicitors and juniors, which said that the Garrick is particularly legal, which is why other people probably don't want to go there. It's actuary, but it's also legal. There are a lot of lawyers, a lot of judges, including Supreme Court judges. And is it right that one sector of the law, the male sector, can hobnob with other judges, other barristers, but only male barristers? And is this part of what's keeping women in the background so that, you know, there's a very small amount still of judges who are women and a very small amount of QCs?
The reason that we're talking about this, Casey's, of course, the reason that we're talking about this is because people like Stephen Fry, Joanna Lumley, etc., say, no, they shouldn't just be a men's-only club anymore. But the counter-argument is that there are women-only clubs.
There are. And I was thinking about this. I mean, I belong to a couple of women's-only clubs. Sometimes you have to form your own clubs because you can't get into other clubs. But there are places where there are influences which people are being excluded from. And I think there is a separate argument, which is what the petition was about, which says that if judges are going to be in a place like that with access to senior barristers who are male but not female. Should the judges actually be doing that? Should senior barristers, and you can take it further, should senior barristers who, like myself, practice in the field of discrimination, be a member of a club that, albeit lawfully, discriminates against women? And Lady Hale, who, as you know, was the first female Supreme Court judge and the president of that court, voiced, I think, 10 or 12 years ago, her surprise that her colleagues who are on the Supreme Court and who are also members of the Garrick were members of this club, and she felt that it was wrong. And
it's about opportunity.
It's about opportunity, it's about access.
51% of members in a postal vote, members of the Garrick, have said, yes, we're in favour of admitting women, which sounds great, could take some time. Let's wait and see. 2/3 to change it. But also, there's a 10-year waiting list.
There's a 10-year waiting list. So even if you were to be proposed tomorrow, you might have some trouble actually getting in. And if you were, are you prepared to wait 10 years for the pleasures of the Garrick Club?
I was going to say something rude about the food, but I'm not going to.
No, I don't think that would be a good idea.
No. Just your point on he or she. Yeah. I always hear the argument when people try to use that argument is the French always say le bébé because he or she is still le. It's still the male pronoun. So I don't understand the argument.
Well, the argument will be that there was a strict interpretation in the opinion that they took. They like that one. They don't like the new one. And they say, well, it's just this opinion. Well, barristers give their opinions. That's what we do. And the question is, do you listen to it or not? But the argument is that just because it says he shall be admitted or he shall be nominated, it doesn't mean it has to be only a he who can be admitted. So it's one of those wonderfully arcane legal arguments that will no doubt keep a court busy for some time.
It's good to see you. Thanks for explaining that to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Very quick look at the weather for you.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Turning unsettled, a bit milder, still be some wintry conditions over the next couple of days. Northern and western parts, fine but frosty now, bar a few coastal showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Still to come in the final hour of the programme. The Home Secretary has just arrived in Rwanda. What's he doing there? Stay tuned. Bye. Morning, everybody. 9 o'clock. More Home Secretaries have visited Rwanda than asylum seekers, 3 times as many. Labour's Yvette Cooper criticises the government's immigration strategy as James Cleverly touches down in Kigali to sign a new treaty. Meantime, the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, told us this morning he's confident the first deportation flights will happen before the next election, Tuesday, 5th of December. The Home Secretary arrives in Rwanda to sign a new asylum treaty, which the government hopes will bring down immigration numbers. The deal with Rwanda is part of a major shake-up that the government hopes will slash migration numbers by 300,000 per year.
If you or I crossed an international border or literally broke into another country, we would expect to be treated very seriously.
Broke into another country, are you? People who come on small boats.
I am, yeah.
That's the phraseology you have to use.
I am.
Also ahead, the UN warns there is nowhere left to go after Israel issues fresh evacuation orders in Gaza. At least 9 people have been killed by a cyclone battering India's southern coast. Why the government is telling us all to stock up on candles and batteries, not necessarily scented ones. Singer Rita Ora shows some backbone at London's Fashion Awards.
They got cars big as bars, they got rivers of gold, but the wind goes right through you, it's no place for the old. When you first took my hand on a cold Christmas Eve, you promised me Broadway was waiting for me.
The story behind one of the nation's favourite Christmas songs, how it could have been Chrissie Hynde who sang the famous duet.
All the jokes they were singing, we kissed on a corner, then danced through the night.
Mari and Helena are here. Robert Jenrick this morning.
Yes, morning, Kay. Robert Jenrick, Home Office Minister, has said illegal migrants are breaking into our country. Massively explosive language from the Home Office this morning.
Candles?
Yeah, well, the government wants us to buy more candles, batteries, as well as torches, because they think we're too reliant on our digital infrastructure. And in case that gets wiped out by an attack, then we're in trouble.
OK, watch out if you're asking for 4 candles, though, won't you? We'll see you a bit later on. Thank you. Home Secretary James Cleverly has touched down in the Rwandan capital of Kigali. Our political correspondent is here, as you saw. We'll be bringing you live pictures from there as well in just a few moments' time. Before we do that, these are latest pictures from the Genocide Museum in Kigali being shown around by the President. We're expecting a deal to be announced a bit later on.
Yes, we're expecting James Cleverly, Home Secretary, to be signing that treaty with the Rwandan government today. There's going to be a press conference later today as well. And also, he's, as you've seen from those images, been visiting the Genocide Memorial. So he's going to be meeting with his counterpart, Dr. Vincent Biruta. Now, they are also going to sign the treaty, but also they're going to discuss key next steps for the Rwanda partnership. And this is really interesting because they are saying that this treaty is going to provide assurances that Rwanda will not return anyone who has been sent over to Rwanda via this partnership to their country of origin, because that was one of the issues with the Supreme Court ruling. They didn't feel that Rwanda was safe. They didn't feel that Rwanda could guarantee that kind of, they call it refoulement. And therefore, that is the kind of one of the key issues of this treaty. So we're expecting the treaty to be signed a bit later today. There'll be that press conference from the Home Secretary. He'll fly back this evening, and then we're expecting that emergency legislation, or as you say, legislation, to be coming into the Commons maybe even Thursday this week for hand. But that's a guess for now, but that's the expectation. And that is therefore going to be a key moment for Rishi Sunak. He's absolutely not out of the woods yet, because depending on how far they want to go with the emergency legislation, what they call the kind of full fat versus the skimmed approach, will depend on the backbench reaction and therefore how much support Rishi Sunak has.
Wording, phraseology, lingo, always really important. This is what Robert Jenrick chose to say this morning.
I think it's profoundly wrong for people to be entering our country illegally on small boats. According to the law, okay, the law says you can't enter the country illegally. If you or I crossed an international border or literally broke into another country, we would expect to be treated very seriously.
They broke into another country, are you? The people who come on small boats?
I am, yeah.
That's the phraseology you're happy to use, Minister?
I am. If somebody comes into our country on a small boat,
are breaking into our country?
Yes, they're coming into our country in flagrant breach of our immigration rules. That is wrong. I think it's doing untold damage to our country. That's why we're determined to stop it. We have made a lot of progress over the course of this year. The numbers coming out of small boats have reduced by around a third.
So why do we need to send them to Rwanda?
Because we want to go further. The public don't expect us just to reduce their numbers by a third, although that is amongst the best records of any European country. They want us to stop this in its entirety.
See, now, I thought Yvette Cooper would pick him up on his lingo, but she didn't.
Exactly. Labour Shadow Home Secretary, potentially the next Home Secretary in the general election, if Labour were to win, she would not condemn the language. She wouldn't say yes or no whether she would use it, but she wouldn't say, no, I would never use that word. I would never use that phrase.
This is what she said. Oh, I think we might have lost it.
Oh.
There we go. Shall we try it one more time? Stand by.
What we've got is it's a bit like Groundhog Day. You've got the third Home Secretary in less than 2 years off to Rwanda with another chequebook. They've already spent £140 million. More spent this year. They won't tell us how much. More promised again next year. They've got more Home Secretaries going to Rwanda than they have asylum seekers for this failing scheme that's still only going to tackle a few hundred people when more than 1,000 people have come over the last week.
It's really interesting because I think you are going to realistically hear some Labour reaction today that nobody from the kind of Labour front bench, Shadow Home Secretary, would condemn that language. And I think that language for some is very divisive and for some might seem as slightly kind of harsh, robust as a minimum at least. So I think it'll be interesting to watch the Labour reaction today to the fact that Yvette Cooper wouldn't condemn that kind of rhetoric. She also said, you know, rhetoric's less important than action. And she obviously has a point. We know that at the end of the day, rhetoric doesn't change government policy and it doesn't stop numbers coming down. But nonetheless, I think people will find it surprising that she didn't condemn those words.
OK, Yusra is with us now, actually, from Kigali, where the former Foreign Secretary, now Home Secretary, which is why he's there this morning. Hi, Yusra, so what's the plan for the rest of the day?
So he's just here at the Genocide Memorial Museum now. He's actually inside looking at photos of the victims of the genocide in 1994. Once he leaves here, we're expecting that he'll have some private meetings before the treaty signing this afternoon. It's scheduled for around 1 to 2 p.m. Just now, he's coming out, he's leaving the Memorial Museum. You can see him now. This is done the morning section, which was to kind of acknowledge the history of Rwanda, but also within the tour there is a sense that this really does add to Rwanda's pride in hosting refugees. Currently they're hosting 130,000 refugees, but this is not what the UK Supreme Court ruling is deciding on. They've deemed it unlawful based on evidence presented by the UN refugee body that there have been forced repatriation of asylum seekers.
So there was no pity on young, innocent kids.
So while we pause for a moment, along with the Home Secretary, to view the museum for the genocide, as you said, in 1994, just remind us of the reason why the Home Secretary is there today.
Is about an exhibition of hope, where we have stories of young people who
were 10 years old during the genocide was heard for the aftermath of the genocide, talking about peace, but after the introduction of the peace-building education in schools, in universities, young people changed their mindset, decided to be different, like Olivier, who witnessed the death of his father. He was praying, saying that, Father, Lord, help me so that I can revenge to people who killed my dad. After going through the training and becoming a critical thinker, people with a person with the empathy, the choice is not to take revenge, is to live with others. Teresa, whose father paid the law in genocide, she used to think that the father is serving the sentence because of bad people, bad leadership, people who are out of the hate. But after knowing the history, becoming a critical thinker, have that empathy, be responsible, she's playing the role of telling the father to ask for forgiveness and live with others in peace. This is how the young generation, how the leadership is bringing people together. And when you talk about the climate change, talking about the future, the current situation in the world, we're very concerned about these all other sources of where even the mass migration caused by the climate change happening, and all this coming with that food insecurity, mass migration, hate speeches with impunity, all leading to this or other insecurity. So we are starting the Peace Institute with the government of Rwanda to talk about this, where the peace education is included, trauma healing, but sustainable livelihood, but also refugee integration, and also training the hosting community to be ready to live peacefully with all those people migrating. Home Secretary, I would like to thank you very much for your time visiting the exhibition.
Thank you. It's obviously very moving seeing what happened, but also, as I was saying downstairs, your country's reaction to this terrible situation has been amazing. Genuinely remarkable. How, you see through the exhibitions here and the things that you've been saying, the choice to do something positive, the conscious choice to do something positive, and not allow those terrible events from nearly 30 years ago to kind of hold you back, but actually use them as a jumping off point for something much more positive, I think is happening deep now.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome your comment in our guest book. Thank you very much for your time.
Secretary James Cleverly visiting Kigali just for one day, being shown around the Genocide Museum in Kigali. Nearly 1 million ethnic Tutsi and moderate Hutus were killed during the situation that resulted in that genocide back in 1994. The Home Secretary just signing the visitor book there. He will be signing a pact, we believe, with Rwanda later on today that the British government is confident will see planes taking off from London on their way to Kigali, within the next few months. I did press the Home Office Minister earlier on today, asking him whether he thought the planes would take off before the next election. Certainly, the Stop the Boats campaign is one of the main prongs of Rishi Sunak's campaign to deal with immigration, a central plank of this government's election campaign, whenever that may be. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you on the programme. Sellafield nuclear site denies its IT networks have been attacked by cyber groups linked to Russia and China. An investigation by The Guardian found security breaches going back to 2015 for the nuclear site in Cumbria. The newspaper says these were not reported to regulators for several years, while sleeper malware embedded on networks could still be there. The Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho, posted on Twitter the reports of an alleged cyber attack at Sellafield are deeply concerning. While they have strongly refuted allegations of a successful cyber attack, I've written to the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority for a full explanation. Former US ambassador has been charged with spying for Cuba for more than 40 years. Manuel Rocha, who served as US ambassador to Bolivia in the early 2000s, was arrested at his Miami home on Friday. Number of people confirmed dead following the eruption of Indonesia's Mount Merapi has now reached 23. A second eruption spewed hot ash as high as 800 metres and delayed search operations. The UN's warned of panic in Gaza after Israel issued more evacuation orders telling people to move. The number of people displaced has doubled to around 1.9 million. That's more than 3/4 of the entire population. We'll get the latest from Alistair in Jerusalem in just a moment. But first, let's hear from Stuart.
It doesn't matter where you are now in Gaza, the fighting is getting closer and closer. People are sheltering in this hospital courtyard in the north of Gaza. Outside, the battle rages. Smoke rising from an airstrike nearby. Further south, they're in tents again in the hospital complex. But in reality, it's not safe here either. 3-year-old Khalid was in one of those tents when a missile hit nearby. This is the intensive care unit. He's being treated on the floor. His distraught grandmother by his side. Khalid was hit by a single piece of shrapnel as he slept.
We were sleeping in the tent when we found the boy bleeding, and when we took him inside the hospital, we saw that a missile had hit behind the hospital. And as you can see, he's injured and he's in ICU. They say it's safe here.
In another hospital, or at a different time, Khalid may have lived, but he did not. He couldn't be saved here. Family took him away, another child lost. The Israeli Defense Forces have confirmed their operations in the north are nearing completion, and the focus now is on the south. Their latest pictures show soldiers taking positions deeper and deeper into Gaza. The instruction to the population is to move further south immediately.
We are giving precise instructions to Gazan residents near Hamas centers of gravity, urging them to temporarily move away from the danger that Hamas puts them in.
But it's not easy. This is the road south. A woman with children and local journalists are attacked. They run for safety. Bullets whistle by. Why they were targeted is unclear, but they were heading south. Israel's right to defend itself is undoubted, but it's the cost to human life that's the issue. And the numbers of civilian dead is equally, undoubtedly rising. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Southern Israel.
Alistair, we've been speaking throughout the morning about what the United Nations view is on the latest situation now in southern Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, the concern, as you saw from Stuart's report, and it's pictures like that are leading international organisations like the United Nations, who of course have a major presence on the ground in Gaza, to be very worried about what is happening and what might happen next. The Americans have been quite clear in their warnings to the Israelis, both in public and in private. They expect the civilian casualties to be dramatically reduced from what we saw in the first few weeks of the war in northern Gaza, but it doesn't look as though that is happening. Whether the Israelis are not heeding American advice or whether or not it is the reality of what is going on during a wartime in Gaza, it's hard to know. But as long as civilian casualties and the death toll continues to rise as it does, I think it will put a lot of pressure on the Israeli military to pull back some of their operations. They probably know that, and so that's why the tempo of operations is pretty high at the moment, because they have so much unfinished business. They haven't achieved any of their objectives yet in Gaza, and so they might be working on the basis that they've only got a matter of weeks to do so.
OK, Alistair, thank you. Let's bring in James Elder, UNICEF spokesperson. Hi, James. Thanks for joining us. What is the latest situation in southern Gaza?
Horrendous, and it's an absolute nightmare. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare, to be honest, Kay, during the ceasefire, because we have a humanitarian crisis of just 1 million people on the move without homes, without a reliable access to a safe amount of water and food. Now the bombardment has started again with this ferocity. We all heard the promises, the obligations made, that the destruction and death of children and women and homes in the north would not be repeated in the south. Well, as your correspondent said, I can bear witness to that. This war on children is absolutely every bit as ferocious in the south as we've seen at any time during this war.
We are hearing from the Israeli Defence Force. They say they are doing absolutely everything they possibly can to make sure that civilians are not caught up in this war.
I think the key thing here is it's always talking about they go to so-called safe zones. There are certainly zones that they point to. We hope they are safe. I think you showed there some footage of people being shot on the way, but we hope they're safe. The problem is that under any moral sense or international humanitarian law sense, a zone is safe when all parties agree, but most importantly, when people can access water, food, medicine, and protection. We're not talking now in the shelters where it would take 4 hours for an adolescent girl to get to a toilet. We're now talking about 30,000 people on a street corner with not a drop of water, not a piece, not a skerrick of a shelter, and absolutely no toilets. What this means is, Kay, that we now have the perfect storm for disease. We've been warning about this, UNICEF, the World Health Organization, for weeks. That perfect storm is beginning, and that is because this massive influx of people with absolutely nowhere to go. So the real risk now, the horrendous numbers of thousands and thousands of children killed, continually being killed, as you and I speak, risks being matched by deaths from disease. That's what we get when they're pushed to these zones that are anything other than safe.
IDF would counter that by saying there is a stretch of land close to the sea in the southwest of the Strip, which is about 14,000 kilometres, something like that, square kilometres, and that it is a safe place for Gazans to be. I've spoken to other people who say there is literally nothing there. There's no infrastructure. There is nothing that will allow people to live there safely. Do you know this area? What can you tell us about it?
I do. It's called Al-Mawassi. It's exactly 1K by 14, so 14 square kilometres. It makes up about 4% of Gaza, Gaza being one of the most densely populated places on the planet. So it's about 4% of Gaza, and it would require 80% of the population to be there. If you imagine a car park of people stacked on top of each other, still without a toilet, still without a drop of water. So here you would absolutely have zones that are zones of disease and would become, in any sane projection, zones of death. So it's such an important narrative to break, this idea that people can just go to a safe zone if they wish. There is absolutely nothing safe about this. And I think, Kay, to be honest, those people making these decisions and telling people to go there, they're aware of that. This is calculated. It's cold, and it speaks to the indiscriminate nature and the lack of any sense of decency that has been enacted on relentless attacks on mums and kids and families.
OK, of course it's 14 square kilometres. I misspoke. Forgive me. Thank you for the clarification there, James. What's your prediction?
Oh, a nightmare, Kay. My prediction is you're going to see so much more heartache. You're going to see the images that I have etched in my brain, Kay. You're going to see mothers crying over 6-year-old children who've lost their right arm and their right leg. You're going to see children wandering because their mum and their dad was killed. You're going to see little boys sitting there because his twin brother and his father's been killed. You're going to see many more children with third-degree burns. These are not unique stories. I've never been to a place where every time I turn around, every time I listen to a child or a health worker America, I hear something that would shatter any decent person's heart. So unless compassion and empathy come back into this, and of course an understanding that peace is not going to be gained in the Middle East by mass killing of children and destruction of Gaza, then we just see more polarisation, more hatred, pushing everyone further away from peace and some security for the children of Palestine and Israel.
OK. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Always welcome on the programme. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay.
Still to come, as James cleverly touches down in Rwanda to sign a new treaty, we get the thoughts of former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood. We'll find out why the government is telling us all to stock up on candles and batteries. Plus, football's staying home. The Premier League secures its largest ever UK television rights deal.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. You must not meet socially in groups of more than 6, and if you do, you will be breaking the law. There was no party, and that no COVID rules were broken. The reason there's no evidence to show that I must have known, or I must have believed that illegal events were taking place is because I didn't.
Kingdom. These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Is here again. Torches, candles, batteries, what's going on?
Well, if you have these items in your house, then you might be very well prepared for either a cyber attack or a natural disaster. Basically, the government wants us all to have things like a torch, some candles, maybe not tea lights, but candles of some kind, as well as
That'll work.
I mean, in an emergency, anything will work, right? So you've got some batteries as well that you could put into your radio, because if the internet goes down, there's no power, you can't charge your phone, you put your batteries in your radio and you can hear all the essential information coming from authorities. Now, this is coming from Oliver Dowden. He's the minister in the government who's in charge on preparing the country for any potential disaster. He says that we're all too reliant on our digital infrastructure, really reliant on getting our information from our phones, getting lights on tap, switching on a button, getting everything that we need, which means that we're not prepared in case there is some sort of a natural disaster or there's a cyber attack, something that wipes the lights out, and we don't have these essential items to get us through the day. Now, there will also be something called a resilience website, which the government will launch next year with more helpful tips, although they should probably create a resilience booklet as well to keep with this.
You'd think, wouldn't you?
Keep with the theme of not relying on technology. It's nothing to be worried about or panic about. It's nothing in response to like an imminent threat, but the government wants us to be prepared. They have published a list of 89 potential threats to the UK earlier this year. They include things like, interruptions to the undersea cables that provide communications, and potentially someone malign using drones to disrupt our transport systems, threats to the national grid. All sounds very, very serious. But if you've got some of these items, and your power goes out and you can't charge your phone, it will help you get through the day.
So just tell me how these are going to help me.
So this will help you. It's your torch. So you can see in the dark, at least until, the battery runs out. But you've got your AA batteries here. You put them in your radio, and then you get all your essential information from authorities in case of a national emergency, what to do, because you can't do it from your phone. It's dead and you can't charge it because there's no power. And then you've got your candles here as well, very old-fashioned, but works. Analog, a way of basically seeing what's around you. And yeah, you're kind of sorted for a while at least.
Oh, an hour and a half.
These candles maybe like 45 minutes. But
okay, but, lovely. Thanks. So you better give that back. That's not your torch.
Not mine. No, you can tell.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you. Now let's tell you what's been happening in India's southern and eastern coastlines. A powerful storm there. Schools have been closed. Thousands have been moved to safety as Cyclone Michaung makes landfall on the southern state of Andhra Pradesh. Authorities say 9 people, including a child, have been killed in the floods. New guidelines are being set out on housing transgender prisoners in Scotland. Any trans prisoners with a history of violence against women and girls will not be placed in female jails unless there is compelling evidence that they don't pose a risk. Let's get more now with Connor. Morning.
Yeah, good morning. This centres around Adam Graham, the double rapist who, while awaiting trial here in Scotland earlier on this year, became known as Isla Bryson, and following the guidelines at the time from the Scottish Prison Service, was sent to an all-female prison. And clearly there was an almighty row between politicians and a standoff between campaigners at that time. Isla Bryson was swiftly removed after Nicola Sturgeon intervened and made her position clear at the time. There has been an ongoing review around what to do with trans prisoners here in Scotland, and today those details have been published. It essentially says that trans prisoners with a history of violence against women and girls will not be sent to female prisons apart from in what's called exceptional circumstances. So they need to not present an unacceptable risk of harm. Now, clearly, this puts Scotland on a very different path to England and Wales, where all trans women who haven't undergone surgery are completely banned from women's jails altogether. So that is a different path between north of the border and south. Nevertheless, Scottish prison chiefs have suggested that this is a safe policy. Opponents are saying that it is far too dangerous a situation to continue. They are saying people like Isla Bryson are beasts who game the system to try and get access to women. Clearly, that is something that is completely denied by ministers here and those running our prisons.
OK, for now, thank you. Quick look at the weather for you.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Turning unsettled, bit milder, but there'll still be some wintry conditions over the next couple of days. Northern and western parts are fine, but frosty now, bar a few coastal showers. England and Wales, milder, but largely overcast and windy, outbreaks of rain. That will fade through the morning with sunny spells developing in the north and the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
As James cleverly touches down in Rwanda to sign a new treaty, we get the thoughts of the former Defence Minister, Tobias Ellwood. Hi again, everybody. Back to Rwanda. James Cleverly's there, our Home Secretary, of course, as is Usra. Hi, Usra. So talk to me about what the plan is today. We have seen him already this morning. His schedule is behind what it should be, but he has got a treaty to sign.
Now to high-level, high-security meetings that we won't be privy to, unfortunately. But then we're expecting him at the Foreign Ministry, where he'll meet Vincent Biruta, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also International Cooperation, and that will precede the big ceremonial treaty signing today. We have been looking at what the measures will be that will be in this treaty that take it away from the Memorandum of Understanding that they've been operating on since April 2022. And we did put that forward to the Rwandan government, and they've actually told us that there will be non-removal clauses, providing that no relocated individual shall be removed from Rwanda, and that this is regardless of status. We did ask the government spokesperson, Yolande Makolo, about these reports about British lawyers being stationed in Rwanda in courts, and she said that is completely off the table. So this is the first indication we've had about what the new measures will be that they hope will offset the concerns of the UK Supreme Court.
OK, for now, thank you. Let's bring in Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP, former Defence Minister. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Home Secretary in Rwanda, thoughts?
Yeah, well, firstly, yesterday was all about legal migration. I'm really pleased to see that there are new conditions put in place, broadly supported by Labour as well. That'll bring net migration down by 300,000 to pre-COVID levels. And there's exemptions for the care sector that's welcome. I hope that they'll be extended to the hospitality sector as well. In Bournemouth, we need chefs to come through, and at the moment they would be excluded. I wish the Home Secretary well, but this is a tactical aspect of a strategic objective to slow down the boats, to prevent the boats from coming across. And we cannot pin our electoral hopes on this particular aspect alone. If it fails, we need to move on to other areas as well. So the tone of this is important to get right. I hope that we can resolve the issues from the Supreme Court. This was all about, as was just being explained, whether individuals could then be moved back to their original country or not. But we can't go down the road of leaving the ECHR that's been perhaps suggested. We help craft international law. We help uphold it. We don't break it.
Do we send our lawyers to third-party countries?
Well, that's also an interesting aspect of this. Interestingly, Germany, France, Italy, other countries are looking at this model to see whether it can be replicated. But if, as I say, the problems become insurmountable, then we do need to look at other avenues. And the Home Secretary, who many of us were able to speak with last night, understood this. We must not lose sight of the fact that there is a migration challenge into Europe, and it's only going to get worse with climate change as well. We need to be working with our allies. What we're experiencing is actually worse in France and in Germany as well. The numbers there are much, much higher as well. And I've said this repeatedly. Unless we deal with the source, with these countries that are at war or at conflict, then the numbers of migrants, the people fleeing these countries, will continue to rise. And a system such as Rwanda will simply not be able to deal with those numbers.
OK. A whiff of colonialism if we send our own lawyers?
Well, that's, I've heard that being mentioned as well. I think this is all to do to make sure that Rwanda itself is applying and honouring international law as well. Because that was the concern. The Supreme Court didn't say that the concept was illegal. They were simply concerned about what would happen in Rwanda as well.
Talk to me about what's going on in Gaza.
Well, the humanitarian pause is now over, and that nightmare now resumes. The nightmare for the hostages and the remaining hostages and their families, for the Palestinians in need of aid, and of course, on both sides, fearful of what falls from the skies. People like me, interested in the military, we study conflict. We, El Alamein and Montgomery, Patton in Sicily, Fallujah.
Going back a bit now.
With Petraeus, or indeed Schwarzkopf in the Gulf War. I'm afraid to say that people are going to look at this particular insurgency and say this is not the way to go about it. This is the wrong way to actually deal with a terrorist operation. They are actually fueling recruitment of Hamas, and there's no end game in sight. What is the governance? What is security? What is the humanitarian support? What is the framework that needs to be there? Israel cannot do this alone, and they need to be working with the international community for long-term objectives. Netanyahu has sent the tanks in with no clarity as to where this goes. And the voices, international voices...
With the support of the West, Joe Biden has supported him increasingly more cautiously, but up until now, Joe Biden has supported Benjamin Netanyahu.
Up until now. And you're hearing the public voices of condemnation to say that the collateral damage is wrong. Imagine what is being said behind the scenes as well. As I say, we've just entered a new era of this of Israelis' campaign, and it's a darker chapter. And the prospect of escalation, I'm afraid, is very, very high indeed. We need to clarify where this goes. And I really make it clear that Israel cannot do this alone. There needs to be international collaboration. The Arab nations can provide support on the governance. We can provide a green zone, if you like, around Gaza in the longer term, too, to buffer the two sides, to provide security on both sides. But ultimately, if you want to get rid of Hamas, This is not the way to do it.
OK, we must leave it there. It's good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Let me tell you about Prince Harry's legal challenge against the Home Office. It'll go to court today. The Duke of Sussex is taking action over the decision that he would no longer be provided with the same level of police protection while in the UK. The hearing will last 2.5 days. US police are investigating an explosion at a house in Virginia where officers were trying to serve a search warrant. None of the officers was seriously injured, but it's unclear what happened to the suspect. An American tourist has died after being attacked by a shark while visiting the Bahamas. The woman was paddleboarding with a partner in New Providence. The lifeguard rescued the pair, but the woman who police say was in her 40s, couldn't be saved. Rob's here. Football staying home.
It is on Sky Sports. Still going to be the place to watch the Premier League, as it has been since 1992.
I remember it well when we first got the deal. Tell me what this deal looks like.
Well, there's a lot more games that will be on Sky, 100 more per season. It's going to be at least 215. 4 out of the 5 packages Sky have bought from the Premier League for 4 years, up until 2029. The other package with TNT Sports. And it means Amazon are out of the picture. The streaming platform, no longer a Premier League's rights holder under this new deal. And it means every game that isn't at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon will now be live on British screens.
How much does it cost?
Well, it's going to be £6.7 billion over 4 years. It's a 4% increase for the Premier League, so they've extracted more cash from Sky and TNT, but by increasing the number of games available. And it is, compared to previous deals, we've not seen the big upsurge that perhaps we saw in the past, but for the clubs, they now have the certainty going forward how things are going to look, the transfer budgets, and there's even more cash to come from overseas too.
Very exciting about the final day of the season as well.
Yes, all 10 games will be live here for the first time on Sky, as will all the Boxing Day games. But a lot of people around the world see all 380 games that are live if you're going abroad, if you're going on holiday. But still here, a lot of the games aren't shown, particularly those 3 o'clock Saturday ones, to protect the attendances in the lower leagues in particular. But there are calls to open up that 3 o'clock slot to be used for the Women's Super League, to be able to give the women's game its own slot that isn't sort of consumed by all the men's football that's obviously so dominant.
OK, when's it start?
This will be from 2025, 2026 season, so about a season and a half left on the current deals. And for fans, obviously, a chance to see more football on television. For lower league clubs, they'll be asking how much of the cash are they going to see, because they want it redistributed to ensure there isn't a sort of widening wealth gap between the leagues. OK, it's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. And let's just celebrate and joyous news. Thank you. Just before Christmas too. Now, December, meaning some of you may have started putting on your favourite Christmas songs. Have you got one? Step Into Christmas. I just remember the Gavin and Stacey version of that the other day. Oh, Step Into Christmas. Who was that? That was that Slade? There was an Elton John version, wasn't there? Oh, it was Elton John. Oh, OK. This one's my favourite. Yeah. It's a classic, isn't it? Yeah, we have to cut around it quite carefully. Some reworked lyrics. This time in the morning. Fairy Tale of New York, of course, by the Pogues. Features the iconic voice of Kirsty MacColl singing alongside the late Shane MacGowan now. But the song's producer, Steve Lillywhite, has told the Daily Mirror newspaper that the band originally wanted Chrissie Hynde to feature instead, before eventually agreeing to let his then-wife, Kirsty MacColl, try out the vocals. How different the song might have sounded. Can't make it all alone. I built my dreams around you. The boys of the NYPD chorus, the singing go away by, and the bells are ringing out for Christmas Day. Darren, our director, kept trying to wind us up, but we weren't having it. Coming up after the break, hills floating above the clouds. We'll meet the amateur photographer who captured this stunning weather phenomenon in Worcestershire. Stay tuned.
United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Slay Emirates, slay better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Stunning weather phenomenon known as cloud inversion has been captured on camera at the Malvern Hills in Worcestershire. Amateur photographer Nick Sturdy took hundreds of images which show frost-covered hills poking through the clouds. Let's get more. Nick is joining us now. Hi, Nick. First of all, what is a cloud inversion?
Hey, Kay. Yeah, so that's apparently where the temperature on the ground level is actually lower than what it is above the cloud level. And so it forces the cloud downwards. That's how I understand it anyway.
OK, so I actually was lucky enough to see this at the Grand Canyon some years ago. It's pretty spectacular when you see it, isn't it? Tell us more. Why were you there? And it's so crystal clear, those pictures.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely fantastic. So just funny enough, just the night before, I'd been speaking to a friend about walking on the Malvern Hills and being there for a cloud inversion. And yeah, sure enough, I saw on social media someone had taken a picture of the sunrise, and I thought, right, I need to get there and experience it myself.
So it wasn't as if you'd just stumbled on it by accident. You were just privileged to know that it was coming.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm very privileged to live near to the Malvern Hills, so I was able to get there rather sharpish, yeah.
OK, and what are you going to do with all the pictures that you took? Took plenty, didn't you?
Yeah, no, I think they'll be certainly kept for posterity, but it's a very cliche, but it's certainly the memories that are going to stay with me forever anyway. It was just an incredible moment to be there.
Have you seen it before?
No, I haven't. No, it was my very first one. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be keeping out for when it's foggy in Worcester and make sure to get up on the hills and up above the clouds again.
OK. And Nick, just before I let you go, where can people see your pictures apart from on the telly right now?
Yes, yeah. So I've just started my own Instagram account where I've following getting into photography, and so yeah, it's at Nick Sturdy, STURDY on there if anyone wants to have a look.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing them with us today. Really appreciate it, Nick. Well done. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Kay. Thanks very much.
Take care. Thank you. Now, the world famous Christmas tree has arrived in Trafalgar Square. Who knows where it comes from? Yeah, anybody? Of course, Norway. It's a gift that they continue to give to us as a result of our help during the Second World War, I think I'm right in saying. It arrived from Norway this week. Missing some branches and looking a little bit sorry for itself, according to passers-by. The 20-metre high tree had a facelift by workers who hammered in extra branches to bulk it out. Christmas lights will be draped onto it vertically, following Norwegian tradition, with the energy-efficient bulbs being switched on during a ceremony on Thursday. Now, from one unusual-looking Christmas tree to another, locals in Ullapool, Westeros have created a fishing creel Christmas tree. That's a Christmas tree made of lobster pots. Looks great. 16-foot structure used 340 fishing creels. It's been built on the harbour side of the village near to Loch Broom. Instead of an angel, a lit-up crab is on top of the tree. Locals have been building creel Christmas trees in the village centre since 2016. Looks great. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Turning unsettled, bit milder. There'll still be some wintry conditions over the next couple of days. Northern and western parts are fine, but frosty, bar a few coastal showers. England and Wales are milder, but largely overcast and windy with outbreaks of rain. That will fade through the morning with sunny spells developing in the north and the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Just before we go, have a look at these red carpet ensembles at the British Fashion Awards last night. Among the sequins and glitter was this rather daring look. Your eyes aren't playing tricks on you. Those are spikes you can see on Rita Ora's back, as I was saying earlier on. She's going to ruin her flipping coat wearing those, aren't they? Anyway, everybody had a fantastic night. I'll see you at 7 in the morning. Hope so. Wolf is next. Bye for now.